Hey guys, how are you doing? Today I'm bringing you part 3 of Bunny Girl. Normally, sequels don't perform very well here on the channel, so it's really important that you leave a comment and smash that like button, guys. If the continuations don't do well, there's no way I can keep bringing parts 2, 3, and so on. So let's hit the goal of 200 comments. Without further ado, let's get into the video. This story deals with childhood trauma, school bullying, and conflict between relatives. The protagonist grew up without a mother's affection. She constantly told him it would be better if he just vanished. Even so, Rhea still loved his mother. Eventually, she abandoned him. He was completely crushed, but then he got hit by a truck. And since we already know how that ends, we also know where he ended up. He died and was reincarnated inside a game, the only game he truly enjoyed. To make matters worse, he woke up in the body of a cowardly side character. That character acted so fearful because he possessed a skill called evasion. Nobody chose this character in the game because he refused to fight and only dodged every attack, which made everyone label him a coward. And if that was not bad enough, he was destined to be killed by the rabbit girl. Since he had reincarnated before the game's events began, he decided to change his fate and uncover the identity of the god who placed him inside the game. The story begins on a sunny day at school. It was the rabbit girl's first day of class. Her cheeks were bright red as she nervously introduced herself. Ryu knew she had the potential to destroy the world, yet she still looked like an adorable child. He found himself fascinated by her long ears. Shyly, the girl introduced herself as Ravenna. Her hobbies were reading and listening to music. She also enjoyed watching Korean dramas. At that moment, Ryu began remembering everything this girl had done in the game's story. She hated the world and would eventually destroy everything. Her hatred was so overwhelming that she truly brought ruin and catastrophe. But right now, she looked harmless and cute while asking her classmates to take care of her. Remembering everything Ravenna would become, he was terrified. In other words, guys, he was completely doomed. The game was called Brave Hearts, and he used to play it in his previous life. It was an RPG whose protagonist was a boy named Kong. In the game's story, the world had rebuilt itself after a catastrophe that happened around 200 years earlier. Hunters existed to eliminate monsters, and both magic and technology had advanced greatly. However, the game was extremely complex because it contained around 44 different endings, and only one of them was good. Since he had reincarnated as a weak side character, he would need to work even harder. This character was an irritating coward who ran away from every fight. To make things worse, he suffered bullying from both his classmates and his relatives. The original Ryu was practically useless, and that was the body our protagonist had inherited. The boy stared in disbelief, and when he opened his eyes, he noticed the girl who would become one of the most dangerous villains. No matter what he did, a tragic ending awaited him. Someone suddenly said it was Ryu's turn. He turned around and looked at the rabbit girl. Ravenna seemed like someone carrying all the suffering in the world. After she was born, her parents abandoned her, and everyone mocked her because of her ears. People had always treated her like trash. All of it happened because of a mana disaster that caused her to be born with mutated DNA. She was what people called an AIM. Ryu had heard that this condition was inherited genetically from the parents. That made it even more cruel that she had been abandoned. Now he finally understood why Ravenna became the Witch of Calamity. Because of that, he became determined to change the future and save her. Someone tapped his shoulder, and it was the teacher asking where he wanted to sit. Since he intended to change Ravenna's fate, he walked over to her. He knew his actions could alter everything, especially because he did not want to die at the hands of the Witch of Calamity. As he approached her, Ravenna's eyes sparkled while she asked who he was. Ryu smiled and asked if he could sit beside her. Since the girl had been rejected ever since childhood, she could not understand his behavior. There were still 5 years left before the game's real story would begin, so he needed to become friends with her as soon as possible, even before they entered the academy. But that would not be easy. After guiding her onto the right path, he planned to turn them into allies. He pulled over a desk and sat beside her. It was hard to imagine that such a cute little girl would one day become the witch capable of destroying the world. While sitting there, he kept staring at her and wondered how he should approach her. Ravenna became embarrassed and even asked him to stop staring at her. The boy felt a little down because he was terrible at hiding his thoughts. He wanted to stop wasting time and invite her to his house already. But at that moment, he became distracted by her tale and even shouted when she suddenly called his name. He thought she had caught him staring at her tail, but he quickly covered it up by asking what she wanted. Shyly, the rabbit girl asked why he had chosen to sit beside her. Ryu simply replied that he wanted to be her friend. Ravina looked confused and instantly turned redder than a tomato. He asked why she was reacting that way. She could not understand why he would want to be friends with her, especially since she was an aim. And to make matters worse, he belonged to the famous family of swordsmen, known as the Das family. In other words, guys, she was suspicious of him. That was because Ravina had always been mistreated, so he ended up mentioning Lilica's name. He explained that Lilica was his pet bunny and looked a lot like her. That was why he had become interested in Ravana. The girl immediately got irritated. She said she was not a rabbit but a human, then stormed off with a pout on her face. He stayed behind, apologizing to her. But before leaving, she stopped at the classroom door and shyly said she hoped to see him again tomorrow. Then Ravana ran away in embarrassment. Ryu thought that at least she did not seem truly angry with him. After that, the boy returned home. It still had not fully sunken that he was now inside the world of his favorite game. He even wondered whether this world had status windows just like the game. He looked around to make sure nobody was watching, then stretched out his hand and summoned his information screen. The player status window appeared, and he realized he was not actually weak. When he checked the stats, he was genuinely shocked. Ryu's abilities were far better than he remembered. That made no sense because this character had been a pathetic coward in the game. He was bullied even by the students at the dojo. Because of that, he swore he would change his fate. In his previous life, he had also been rejected, though for entirely different reasons that would be revealed later. Back then, the kid suffered a lot, guys. Honestly, he may have had it even worse than Subaru from Subaru Natsuki. When he arrived home, he realized he now belonged to a noble family. He told his mother he was back, and she asked how school had gone. The moment Ryu realized he finally had a mother, he ran over and hugged her tightly. The woman even asked what kind of life he had lived before. He had been rejected by everyone, including his own mother. So simply having this woman as his mother already meant everything to him. Naturally, she became worried and asked why tears were forming in his eyes. He replied that it was nothing and said he needed to get ready for swordsmanship training. From now on, he intended to truly live as Ryu, and the thing he needed most was to master the Beast King style. That technique was incredibly powerful, and the original character was supposed to learn it much later. He already knew this character's potential because he had once placed him in the protagonist party while playing the game. When he entered his room, he saw the bunny Lilica. He thought she looked adorable. He already knew the rabbit well because after reincarnating into this body, he had inherited all of Ryu's memories. While holding the bunny, he commented that she really did resemble Ravana. But his main concern right now was mastering the Beast King technique. When he arrived at the Swordsman Academy, he noticed there were not many students because he had come early. The Daisen family was one of the most powerful families in the country and even owned its own academy. As soon as he arrived, the other students who were also his relatives were staring at a girl, and our protagonist quickly recognized her. It was Seiko, one of the story's most important characters. She was 2 years older than him and also a gifted prodigy of the family. In the game, she would eventually become one of the strongest swordswomen after graduating and later become Ryu's ally since they belonged to the same family. But what confused him was why she was there despite being 2 years ahead of him. He decided not to approach her yet because it was still too soon. His focus was on learning the Beast King technique, so he immediately began preparing himself. Then he started practicing the various forms and combat styles, which were very similar to the breathing techniques from Demon Slayer. After performing several attack forms, he prepared for the next stage. He continued training for nearly the entire afternoon. At one point, he even wondered whether Seiko was secretly watching him train because he wanted to impress her. At the same time, he found himself genuinely enjoying the training. Soon, the relatives who used to bully him started mocking him again. They were triplets and also distant cousins of his. Inside the game, they were known as Cerberus. They were among the cursed children who constantly bullied Ryu. Our hero realized they were talking about him, so he angrily turned around to hear what they were saying. This was the first time he had experienced bullying in this body, but remembering everything that had happened made him furious just from seeing those smug faces. Every moment of bullying Ryu had endured began flashing through his mind. All the humiliation, kicks, and abuse he had suffered resurfaced. That character had been extremely timid, which was why others took advantage of him. But now our hero was the one inside Ryu's body. He kept telling himself that he would never allow this to happen again. Then he loudly provoked his cousins. The other students heard the insults and were shocked. Without warning, Ryu assumed the charging stance of the second form. Then he launched a swift attack at one of his cousins. The boy was sent flying, and his brother immediately asked if he was all right. Ryu, filled with confidence, asked if the three of them were scared. One of the boys asked what had happened to his cousin because he seemed completely different. Ryu simply told them to get ready, grab their swords, and fight him. Bullies are always like that, guys. They only act brave when their target does nothing back. The three of them even admitted that Ryu had completely changed, as if he carried a much heavier presence now. He shouted once more, telling the three cowards to stand up, or they would get beaten even worse. The more he remembered the humiliation he had suffered, the angrier he became. Then he started yelling, asking if the three of them had gotten so scared they nearly wet themselves. They responded by asking whether Ryu even understood who he was dealing with. Ryu knew perfectly well that his cousin Shuang was the one who ordered the triplets to harass him. The three brothers wondered how Ryu had figured that out. The siblings dreamed of becoming hunters, but their father could not afford the academy tuition. Because of that, the Ozan family sponsored them so they could pursue that path, and the one responsible for supporting them was Shung himself. He only agreed to sponsor the triplets if they kept bullying Ryu. That was why our hero had suffered all those years. Now he confronted them, saying he knew everything, and reminding them that he was also a member of the Ozan family. If he wanted, he could take away their sponsorship immediately. The cowards instantly panicked. At that moment, the swordsmanship dojo master appeared and asked what was happening. Our protagonist answered that the three of them had started the fight. The master asked if that was true. Ryu had fought back because he was not going to stand there and get beaten, and the master questioned the triplets again. The boys froze in fear and quickly decided it was better to agree with Ryu. So they admitted they had caused the whole problem and that Ryu was innocent. The master was shocked because until yesterday, Ryu had been too cowardly to fight anyone. After that, he spent the entire afternoon training. The next day when he went to school, he felt determined and promised himself he would never let anyone humiliate him again. However, something immediately caught his attention. It was Ravana, looking adorable while sitting at her desk. The boy stood there staring at her. Then he casually walked over and greeted her. Ravana's ears perked up and her cheeks turned red as she shyly greeted him back. Trying to get closer to her, he asked what she was reading. The girl replied that it was just a random book, and Ryu said he preferred reading web novels. She asked why he had joined the book club if he did not even enjoy books, and he answered that he joined because he wanted to be near her. Hearing that made Ravana blush intensely. What do you mean? He joined the book club because of me. She admitted that she also liked web novels, but since she had no money, she could only read the free ones. Ryu noticed the mood becoming awkward since she lived in an orphanage and struggled financially, so he changed the subject and asked what kind of dramas she liked watching. Surprised, Ravana asked how he knew about that. He explained that she had mentioned it during her introduction. She hid behind her book in embarrassment, wondering how he could remember something like that. Maybe he genuinely liked her if he still wanted to be friends with her, or perhaps he simply wanted a friend because he did not have any either. In other words, maybe he was only fascinated by her because she was an AIM mate. At least that was what Ravana believed. She even thought he would eventually lose interest in her and abandon her like everyone else always did. Ryu noticed Ravana's ears drooping and thought they looked incredibly cute, making him want to touch them. Of course, he knew asking something like that would be strange. Then he remembered Lilica and decided to cheer her up by showing her a video. She became excited and asked if that was the pet he had mentioned before. So he played the video and explained that he recorded it the previous night. Laughing softly, she found it really entertaining. She even commented that Lilica was unbelievably adorable. Ryu watched her ears twitch and thought she really did resemble his bunny. Then he asked if she wanted to meet the rabbit in person, and she happily agreed. After that, he invited Ravana to visit his house after school. Blushing nervously, she tried thinking of an excuse to refuse. She did not want to relive those painful experiences again, but in the end, she could not resist and accepted the invitation. When she arrived there, she was amazed because his house looked like something straight out of a drama series. The boy's mother appeared and immediately asked if she was Ravana, the friend her son had invited, then warmly welcomed her inside. Ravana had expected to be mistreated because of her genetic mutation. She remembered parents warning their children not to play with her since people looked down on anyone with mutations, but Ryu's mother treated her kindly and made her feel welcome. Her warmth and friendliness were so overwhelming that Ravana almost felt blinded by it. At that moment, Ryu grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her along, telling her to follow him. She was enjoying herself, yet she still worried he would eventually lose interest in her. Even so, she told herself she never wanted to let go of his hand again. After entering the house, she was completely fascinated. The girl tasted delicious food and spent time playing with Lilica. It became one of the happiest days she had ever experienced. Eventually, nighttime arrived. Our protagonist's father returned home from work. The family commented that he was late for dinner, and he awkwardly apologized because he had promised to arrive earlier so they could eat together. His youngest daughter was pouting, saying she wanted to play with the bunny girl, but Ravana had already gone home before she returned from school. Our hero explained that Ravana was his friend and had come over to visit. That was why his little sister was sulking. Ryu then called out to his father and asked if they could train together after dinner. The man became excited and said he could not wait to practice with his son. Ryu wanted to see how much he had improved from his academy training. However, he was not interested in simple practice, he wanted a real fight. His father even asked if he was serious. And with complete determination, Ryu replied that he was because he wanted to kill real monsters someday. The scene then shifted to later that night. They were inside the dojo at home when his father asked why he had suddenly become so interested in growing stronger. In 5 years, he would enter the main branch of the Zan family swordsmanship academy. The game's original protagonist, Kong, would eventually solve countless crises, and Ryu did not want to fall behind. On top of that, his cousin would become an incredibly powerful figure, and even that annoying cousin of his would gain major recognition. In short, guys, he refused to be left behind. The boy's father sensed that something had happened and even asked if someone had been bothering him at the academy. That was because he had heard his son got into a fight during training and that another student ended up injured. However, his son claimed he had done nothing wrong. The father waited for Ryu to explain his side of the story. Meanwhile, our protagonist could not tell whether his father genuinely wanted to listen or was preparing to scold him. Still, he explained that since childhood, he had been taught the family's divine swordsmanship existed to protect people. Those words had stayed deeply engraved in his heart. However, he admitted that this time he had not fought to protect others, but to defend his own dignity, because in his past life, he had endured everything in silence. The boy said that if he could not even protect himself, then he would never be able to protect anyone else. His father asked if that was why he stood up to the bully. Filled with determination, he answered yes, but he also said he wanted more than self-defense. He wanted the strength to protect the weak as well, and to achieve that, he wished to train against real monsters. Ryu's father smiled and gently patted his son's head, saying his reasoning made perfect sense. He even mentioned how much his son had changed in such a short time. Excited, Ryu asked whether his father would help him, and the man agreed, though he had one condition. Curious, Ryu asked what it was. He needed to prove he was strong enough to face a real monster. Because of that, he would have to spar against his own father. But there was a restriction. His father would only be allowed to take 5 steps and would not use mana. That was also to avoid making the challenge impossible for his son. Guys, still, what Ryu truly wanted was to learn the Beast King style. His father replied that he would demonstrate the basics later on. Under those conditions, Ryu believed he had a chance to land at least one hit with the wooden sword on his father's shoulder. The boy stood there thinking seriously. Then he declared it was time to begin the test. Ryu charged forward, but his father blocked the attack effortlessly. The boy pushed off the ground and leaped in for another strike, yet his father stopped it even more easily. So he began searching for openings, and with a smile, his father commented that it would not work. However, Ryan managed to find the perfect gap, forcing his father to step backward. Even that alone was already extremely impressive, guys. At that moment, he realized he still had a small chance, pressuring his father further, and the man proudly admitted he was impressed by his son. But then his father noticed he had lowered his guard and suddenly took a hit to the ribs, and it was not a weak strike either. It was a surprisingly powerful blow. The boy immediately jumped backward to create distance. His father could not believe that a single moment of carelessness had been enough for his son to land a hit. Exhausted, Ryu asked if his father finally acknowledged his abilities, and it seemed he did, though in the most painful way possible. Because of that, he agreed to help train the boy. Then over the weekend, Ryu's father decided to take him monster hunting for training. Naturally, his mother became extremely worried, while his little sister begged to come along too. Still, they reassured her that everything would be fine. His mother warned them not to overdo the training, and then they prepared for the trip to the family academy. According to the game's story, the world had become dangerously unstable. Everything started after the calamity shift, which heavily affected the entire planet. Following that event, monsters from other dimensions began appearing, essentially turning Earth into one giant dungeon. Portals opened across the world with creatures pouring out from them. If those portals were not dealt with in time, the world itself would collapse and become permanently connected to another dimension. In other words, monsters from countless dimensions would invade the planet. If humanity failed to conquer the portals quickly, Earth would be destroyed by those creatures. That was exactly why the game had more than 40 bad endings and only one good ending. The boy's father explained that they first needed to retrieve a key. Ryu asked where the key was located. His father answered that it was stored in the warehouse. Whenever someone cleared one of those portals, they received a key that allowed them to re-enter it later. It seemed that the game system still existed in this world. After arriving at the family headquarters, the boy's father showed him his workplace. Their family owned dozens of branches spread throughout the country. To enter dungeons and portals, people needed a government-issued license, essentially a hunter certification. Since Ryu was not officially a hunter yet, he could only enter alongside his father, and everyone there greeted the man respectfully. That was because our protagonist's father was the branch manager. At that moment, someone suddenly approached and surprised the boy. It was a female employee saying the boss's son was adorable, while everyone around started praising him too. Some of them even pinched his cheeks and commented on how soft they were. Ryu wondered if all hunters acted this strangely. One of the receptionists announced that room 2 was prepared just as the manager had requested. The boy's father called him over, and Ryu asked what kind of key they were using. It was a white rank key. The portal difficulty levels were divided into 7 different colors, starting with white as the easiest, followed by gray, yellow, green, red, and blue. And finally, there was the most dangerous one of all, the black key. The boy's father explained that even the white rank key would already be a major challenge for him, but Ryu was feeling overly confident, almost like a superhero. His confidence was so high that he already wanted to start with a gray rank dungeon. However, his father understood his limits and told him to enter the white rank portal first. After arriving there, his father explained how dungeons work. Ryu was amazed because his family was wealthy enough to own private portals. The man then called his son over and warned him to be extremely careful inside a dungeon since the only way out was by completely clearing it. The boy understood the responsibility and told his father he was ready. His father still looked worried, but he trusted his son's potential. Ryu even joked that if he failed to clear the dungeon, his father could always step in by using the key on the portal. His father agreed, saying otherwise his mother would be furious for putting the boy in danger. Once the portal activated, a bright light filled the area and they passed through it into a crystal-filled cavern. That was what the inside of the portal looked like. A notification window appeared, informing him that he had entered a white rank cave. The mission required defeating 15 goblins, and he immediately assumed it would be easy. So he tossed his backpack aside and drew his sword. He knew it would be dangerous, so he planned to stay cautious. It would not be simple, but it should not be impossible either. That was what he thought. Then something suddenly caught his attention. His father had already captured all 15 goblins in less than 30 seconds. Ryu even asked if he had already caught every single one, and his father confirmed it while pointing with his sword. Now his son could defeat them one at a time for training. Although he felt nervous, he confidently told his father he was ready. So his father began releasing the goblins one by one. The freed monster immediately rushed toward the boy, while Ryu tightened his grip on the sword and prepared himself carefully. The boy possessed deep knowledge of the game and also belonged to the Dazin family's divine swordsmanship tradition. Because of that, defeating these monsters should have been easy for him. The goblin suddenly grabbed one of the crystals to use as a weapon. Ryu had not expected that, guys, but then he lowered his stance and released his aura. This technique was called piercing stance. He prepared a finishing strike against the goblin, and it worked perfectly, sending the monster crashing to the ground. He had not expected it to be that easy. His father let out a relieved sigh, though there were still 15 goblins remaining. Ryu turned toward him and proudly declared that one was already down. Since Game Ryu had belonged to Kang's main party, he carried a unique restriction. The game had a special system called gifts, passive abilities that reflected each character's personality. Because Ryu was considered a coward, his gift was evasion instinct. At first glance, that ability seemed incredibly useful. His father prepared to release another goblin and cut the rope holding it. Evasion instinct automatically moved the user away from attacks that could become fatal. Basically, during the game, the character never attacked because he always prioritized defense. That was why players rejected the character and refused to use him. Some people even claimed the character should be removed from the game because he was so useless. Our protagonist rarely played with that character, but one day he decided to give him a chance. Once the ability awakened, the character gained complete control over the evasion gift. Shouting loudly, he declared that he would improve this power and become unbeatable. Characters who awakened grew stronger over time within the game. Instead of dodging, he tried blocking the next attack and ended up getting thrown backward. There were now 2 monsters standing before him. Because of that, Ryu needed to use these battles to awaken his gift. Combat had seemed much easier inside the game than in real life, but he still believed awakening his power would not be impossible. So he charged forward and pushed himself to the limit. The scene shifted to several minutes later. By then, he had already defeated multiple goblins. His father told him to rest for a while and even joked that his son was performing surprisingly well. However, the boy now wanted his father to release 4 goblins at the same time, so his father accepted the request. The moment it happened, Ryu immediately regretted it because even fighting 2 had already been difficult enough. The goblins were using distraction tactics. Suddenly, he sensed danger approaching from behind, and his evasion ability activated. Without thinking, his body dodged automatically, causing the crystal thrown by the goblin to barely graze his cheek before smashing into the nearby crystals. At that moment, he realized he would have died without that ability. Because of evasion instinct, his body had moved on its own. He understood that he needed to trust that skill more. While training his gift, he continued eliminating monsters. After focusing carefully, he located the goblins and managed to slash one across the leg. He became slightly more confident because he knew the evasion instinct would support him. When another goblin threw an object at him, he dodged effortlessly, leaving the little monster furious. He planted his foot firmly on the ground and leaped toward the creature. Then he sliced the goblin cleanly in half. However, below him, 2 more monsters were already preparing to throw crystals at him. Ryu took a deep breath and activated a sword technique, causing electricity to surge through his blade. It was a swordsmanship skill that demanded intense mana concentration. Then he unleashed the lion-crushing slash and cut down the remaining 3 goblins at once. Right after that, he dropped to the ground and realized only 1 enemy remained, so he immediately rushed toward it. His father appeared and told him to stop charging recklessly and calm down because there was not only 1 goblin left. Several more were still tied up. That was when he realized clearing the dungeon would take much longer than expected. Later on, his father carefully observed everything because the boy had successfully defeated all 15 goblins. Ryu's father told himself that he should have trusted his son from the beginning. Then he called out to Ryu. At that moment, a notification appeared announcing that the portal had been cleared. A bright light shined across the sky, and a key formed before flying directly into Ryu's hand. The boy realized he had conquered the portal and obtained the white rank key. Even so, he still looked dissatisfied. His father patted him on the back and asked why he was upset after successfully clearing the portal. Ryu called out to his father and admitted he was frustrated because he was not satisfied with only clearing a white rank portal. He wanted something greater. What he truly desired was to become much stronger. But if he kept fighting weak monsters, it would take too long. Now that the portal had been cleared, there were no monsters left to defeat there. Because of that, he quietly wondered if he should ask his father to let him challenge another portal. He still had not awakened his gift, meaning he could not fully control his evasion ability. The boy's father kept talking about how shocked he was that Ryu had defeated 4 monsters at once, even grabbing and shaking him proudly while saying the boy clearly took after him. Then the father announced it was time to leave, which immediately surprised Ryu. The exit had already opened, and his father asked him to hand over the key. However, he still wanted to keep training. Feeling slightly awkward, he asked his father if there were any other portals available for practice. He even tried persuading him by saying he felt close to awakening his gift. Ryu believed that fighting inside a more difficult portal might finally trigger his ability. He even confidently claimed he could handle rank 2 monsters, but his father warned that if the boy got hurt, his mother would blame him for it. Still, our protagonist was persuasive enough to convince him in the end. The man admitted he would trust his son because he had already seen his potential. Smiling brightly, Ryu thanked his father sincerely. "Listen, kid, if you put yourself in danger, I'll step in and save you immediately." After that, they headed toward portal number 3. It was still a white rank portal, but completely different from the previous one. His father explained that not all white rank portals were the same. As an extra precaution, he had also brought along another hunter from the company who specialized in healing. Just seeing his father bring support made the boy realize this portal was far more dangerous than the last one. Once the key activated the entrance, they stepped inside excitedly. But the moment Ryu entered, he immediately noticed the place felt different. A notification appeared telling him to eliminate the monsters, yet he could not see any creatures at all. At least that was what he thought. The monsters were actually there because he nearly got hit by one of them. He only avoided the attack thanks to his ability, and immediately froze in shock since he had no idea where the strike came from. Another notification warned him that multiple monsters surrounded him, and only after several seconds did he finally identify their locations. At that point, he became genuinely terrified, guys. Only then did he understand that he was nowhere near capable of clearing a gray rank portal. His fear became so intense that his body nearly froze in place. Above him, his father stood beside the healer, and the older man asked whether he was truly certain his son could handle this. Our protagonist's father stayed silent and simply continued watching him. His son had changed drastically in such a short time because only days earlier, he had been a complete coward frightened by everything. But about a week ago, he suddenly became different, far more serious than before. It was almost as if his son had undergone a positive transformation. He knew very well that Ryu had always possessed a kind heart, which often made him an easy target for ridicule. Because he struggled within the brutal competition of the Zan family, his cousins constantly bullied him. The father still remembered how happily the boy smiled when he received his first sword. Back then, it made him think his son was too gentle to become a hunter. However, he now realized the boy truly had changed, though perhaps not completely. He even remembered hearing that Ryu had made a new friend at school, a girl with rabbit ears, and maybe she was the reason behind this sudden transformation. And after all, boys often try to impress girls. Even the master of the Swordsmanship Academy had mentioned that his son had changed and had even started fighting back against bullies. But Ryu's father became upset at the claim, insisting his son would never attack people because he was naturally peaceful. Scratching his head awkwardly, the master admitted that perhaps Ryu had not revealed the entire truth. Of course, our protagonist's father immediately defended him, saying his son would never hurt someone without a reason. And if he really had fought a bully, then there must have been a good explanation. He already knew his son had been suffering from bullying, and the thought angered him. He even demanded to know why the master never informed him sooner and questioned whether someone had ordered him to stay silent. The man became nervous, clearly hiding the fact that Ryu had been bullied at the dojo. At that moment, the father felt guilty, believing he lacked enough influence within the family. That was why the master chose to obey other family members instead. Then he called Si Young's father, only for the man to mockingly say that Si Young bullied Ryu simply because Ryu was weak and cowardly. But our protagonist's father declared he would no longer tolerate it. And it was on that exact day that our protagonist approached his father and requested a real sparring match. That was when the father realized his son genuinely wanted to change, which was why the situation shocked him so much. He had been completely caught off guard. But soon after, he smiled because his son no longer wanted to remain weak and cowardly. When the boy managed to clear that first white rank portal, he became genuinely happy since Ryu performed far better than expected. In other words, the father was extremely proud. Anyone would have been. However, once they entered a stronger white rank portal, he noticed Ryu acting cowardly again. The boy was not only trembling in fear, he was actively running from the monsters. At that moment, he was struck in the arm, and his father realized the boy was putting himself in danger. The fear in his eyes was obvious. The healer asked the father how long he intended to keep watching without stepping in. Then Ryu stopped because he had been surrounded and called the goblins toward him. His father understood that interfering now would only disappoint the boy. So the only thing he requested was for the support hunter to place a protective magic shield around Ryu. At the same time, he remained ready to intervene with his own technique if the boy truly faced danger. However, something caught his attention. Ryu's movements looked unnaturally stiff because of how tense he was. Yet his eyes did not belong to someone consumed entirely by fear. The boy planted his foot firmly on the ground, and his father became shocked because he recognized the Beast King-style fourth form, Lion Needle Barrage. Right after using it, Ryu started running away again, but all of it was part of his strategy. When a goblin prepared to fire an arrow, he completely trusted his evasion ability and successfully dodged the shot. He understood that standing still meant certain death because the monsters would surround him. The goblin attacked again and he dodged once more. He pushed off the ground with all his strength just to avoid the attacks. Still, fear slowly returned again, guys. One monster leaped toward him, and he killed it while deliberately trying not to rely on evasion. He knew that if he depended on dodging constantly, he would never land any attacks himself. When he realized he had briefly controlled the ability, he became surprised. However, a goblin mage above him suddenly struck his arm. He could not understand what was happening. It felt like more and more monsters kept appearing. Little by little, he became completely surrounded. He had not even noticed it happening. One mistake would definitely get him killed. He looked behind himself and realized there was nowhere left to run. At that moment, he was cornered with no escape route. That was the price of resisting his evasion gift. He even started losing control, convinced he was about to die. His arm throbbed painfully. And just like in his previous life, he knew he could not keep lowering his head and accepting everything. He wanted to become Kang's companion and clear the game successfully. He could have reincarnated as the protagonist instead of ending up as this pathetic crybaby. Just like in his former life, he stood there crying helplessly. He looked at his own reflection and realized he was becoming the very thing he hated most. So he asked himself how much longer he planned to remain this pathetic boy. In his previous life, he had accomplished absolutely nothing. That was exactly why he refused to live as a coward again. He clenched his fists tightly and declared that he could not give up. He refused to die like that, so he slammed his foot hard against the ground. A status window appeared behind him as he prepared to unleash the Dragon Kingdom technique. The pressure from the attack alone was so intense that the goblins became frightened before he even released it. Then he began moving freely through the monsters. The goblin mage laughed confidently, believing he could strike Ryu directly. But Ryu dodged the attack and countered with his sword. He felt happy because his technique was finally working. From above, the boy's father realized that his son had overcome his fear. Even the support hunter asked what had happened because Ryu's attitude changed instantly. In a serious tone, the father simply replied that the boy was his son. The man even asked whether every member of the Ozen family was like that. But the father admitted he was not sure. It looked as though Ryu could predict every incoming attack. He stood there stunned, trying to understand what his son was doing. Eventually, he concluded that this was the gift. Ryu could foresee attacks. On top of that, the boy's determination was truly unbelievable. At that moment, they realized he was using a supreme technique. It was not fully perfected yet, but it was clearly the Beast King style. First form, Lion Crushing Slash. A blue flash burst from the attack, leaving the boy's father unable to understand how his son had managed to perform it. In Baden, the support hunter asked whether the boy was capable of using divine swordsmanship. Breaking into a cold sweat, the father thought to himself that he had never even taught Ryu the technique, yet the boy had already mastered it. Truly seemed that he was a prodigy. Right afterward, he became worried and wondered when exactly his son had awakened such power. Then a notification appeared announcing that the portal had been cleared. The monsters were defeated and Ryu collapsed to the ground from exhaustion. He was so tired that he could barely move. The notification stated that his physical strength stat had increased by 1 point. This world functioned exactly like the game where he could level up. He could grow stronger through either training or studying. However, improving through training was far more difficult. That was what he kept telling himself. In the game, players could transfer their progress to a new save file, but that was impossible in this world. In other words, the only way for him to grow stronger now was through training. The boy's father walked over and asked whether Ryu was still alive since he was not moving at all. The boy laughed and admitted he had pushed himself so hard that he could barely move his body. Still, that reaction was expected because he had fought for such a long time. His father also mentioned that the boy had used the Blue Thunder technique. It was a phenomenon tied to sword techniques and considered a trait of divine swordsmanship. The mana condensation became so intense that it released bolts of energy. Ryu stared in disbelief after hearing that explanation from his father. I really used that technique. Proudly smiling, his father confirmed it and praised him. Looks like your training is paying off, son. You've gotten much stronger. At that moment, the support hunter arrived carrying a sack full of items and explained that the portal had dropped several valuable materials. Magical stones did not appear from portals very often. The man even told Ryu to take one of the stones from the goblin, and when he approached, he realized it was an energy stone. Those stones could be used to increase a person's stats. If he used it, his agility would rise by 1 point. He kept staring at the stone while the support hunter suggested letting the boy use it. Then Ryu's father approached and instructed him to channel his mana into the artifact. He began pouring mana into it, curious about what would happen next. Afterward, they finally left the portal. By Monday, his entire body ached from training. His mother had been furious on Sunday because she told him not to overwork himself. Yet now he showed up at school covered in injuries. Ravana approached him with concern and asked whether he was hurt. He explained that his body was sore because he spent the entire weekend training. Still, he told her not to worry since he had only fought weak monsters. She immediately panicked and asked, "What do you mean you fought monsters? That's way too dangerous for kids our age." But then she remembered that he belonged to the Zan family, which owned magical portals for training. Still worried, she offered him ointments and bandages. However, the boy insisted he was fine. She explained that she always carried medical supplies in her bag, though she did not need them as much anymore. He understood perfectly that she used those bandages because of the bullying she endured. To lighten the mood, she suddenly stuck a bandage on his arm and another on his cheek while saying he looked cute with them. She even explained that it would help him heal faster. Laughing softly, he thanked her and asked if she could remind him to take his medicine. She agreed immediately and even asked if there was anything else she could do to help him recover. She said she would do anything to make him feel better. What a shameless expression. He asked whether she truly meant anything. When she said yes, he asked if he could touch her ears, making the girl scream in surprise. "I am sure you were thinking something else, you shameless girl." She became slightly annoyed and asked what he had just said. He quickly excused himself by claiming it was only a joke. She stood there thinking for a moment before suddenly grabbing his hand and shouting for him to touch her ears quickly. Blushing intensely, she warned him to only pet them gently and not for too long. Then she guided his hand herself, saying she simply wanted to cheer him up. At that moment, he finally touched her ears. He realized they were incredibly soft and fluffy. He honestly thought they felt amazing. He even kept petting them for a while, leaving the girl completely frozen. A moment later, she shouted for him to stop touching them and asked whether he felt better now. Surprisingly, she had actually enjoyed it and even thought it felt strangely comforting. Then she glanced to the side and noticed he really did seem happier, which only made her more embarrassed. At that moment, he admitted it worked and said he already felt better. Then, completely out of nowhere, he asked what she thought about them becoming hunters together someday. She immediately replied that it was impossible because she did not have any money. However, he offered to get her a scholarship since his family was wealthy. She mentioned that he was saying strange things, and he answered that he had his reasons. First, she was a demi-human, meaning her physical abilities were naturally stronger than those of ordinary humans. Second, she possessed a large amount of mana. He even claimed her mana was so strong that he could sense it from far away. Feeling shy and curious, she asked whether that was really true, and he nodded confidently. Just imagining herself becoming a hunter someday already made her excited. After all, once she turned 19, she would have to leave the orphanage with nowhere else to go, and finding work would be extremely difficult because she was a demi-human. Still, his proposal sounded reckless because being a hunter was not something just anyone could do. Even he, despite coming from a powerful family, had ended up badly injured just from training. That was why she believed it would be impossible for a weak and fragile girl like herself. But he loudly assured her that she did not need to worry, because he would do everything possible to help her. He would never abandon her. The girl immediately started falling for him. He even told her that she should believe in herself because she had real potential. Blushing deeply, she shyly asked whether he truly believed in her. She lowered her head and began thinking quietly. Embarrassed, she then asked whether he would take responsibility for what he said. He answered yes and promised that after finishing school, they would enter the academy together. Since he was still holding her hand, she became even more nervous. She pulled her hand away and reminded him that she could never afford a sword academy, but he insisted that he would arrange a full scholarship for her because his family managed a dojo. At that moment, she asked why he was being so kind to her when she had nothing to offer in return. He replied that there was no special reason, but if she really wanted one, he could say he planned to benefit from her someday. Just by looking at the girl's flushed cheeks, it was easy to imagine what she was thinking. He continued by saying that maybe once she became a famous hunter, he could gain some advantages from knowing her. At that moment, she realized he truly liked her. So she smiled and burst into laughter, calling him a very strange person. Deep down, she felt genuinely grateful to Ryu, and because of that, she agreed to train and become a hunter. He even told her she should study magic. If she had a proper teacher, she would excel because she clearly had talent. After that, they began training seriously. They practiced running and jumping rope together. As a result, he spent much more time with Ravana since she rarely left her home before. He knew that if he wanted to improve in magic, he needed to find that instructor. He needed the Witch of Colors, Hong Iona. She was the game's main elemental magic instructor. He had even asked his father to investigate her whereabouts, but they still had not located her. At that moment, someone appeared and asked what he was talking about. When he turned around, he realized it was his father and jumped in surprise. The man explained that he had knocked on the door earlier, but Ryu never answered. Ryu told him he had been thinking about the witch he requested his father investigate. However, his father revealed that they would contact her very soon. The woman's group had agreed to visit them in about a month. Still, they wanted to evaluate Ryu's skill level first before deciding whether to train him. Laughing awkwardly, our protagonist admitted he had not expected that. He already knew there was a strong chance she would refuse to teach him. But in Ravina's case, rejection would almost be impossible because her magical power was enormous, and the witch would definitely notice it. Then his father told him he had some bad news. May had already begun, and every year the same thing happened. The boy became curious about what his father meant. Every May, the Zan family held a large family gathering. Ryu already understood what that meant and immediately asked whether Sung would also attend. His father confirmed that he would. Sung was the bully who ordered the triplets to torment him. His father even said it would be fine if the boy chose not to go. But while suggesting that Ryu stay home, the man suddenly became startled and asked what his son was thinking. That was because his son had an intimidating expression, clearly wanting revenge on his cousins. Then the weekend finally arrived and the family gathering began. Everyone felt tense because those meetings always ended with arguments. Meanwhile, his little sister sat happily in the car because she did not care about any of that. The boy's father warned him not to cause trouble. Recently, those family gatherings had been making his father nervous, but Ryu reassured him and promised he would not start any fights. Besides Ryu being seen as weak and cowardly, his father also had a gentler personality, which caused the Zan family members to constantly look down on them. But this time, Ryu promised things would be different. The day before the gathering, he had been training in the gym while thinking about Ravenna. The two of them had made great progress, and he was already close to controlling his evasion ability completely. To fully master it, he needed to obtain the courage skill. That way, he would stop instinctively running away. Back in his previous life when he played this character, he worked extremely hard to unlock courage because it made the character far stronger. He even mentioned that, after obtaining the skill, the character became almost unbeatable. However, he knew progressing that quickly at the academy would be difficult because Ravenna's physical strength was still very low. On top of that, there was another problem. The conditions for acquiring that skill were extremely difficult. First, Ryu needed a companion stronger than himself. Afterward, he had to face an opponent who emitted overwhelming pressure without receiving any outside help. But at the moment, Ravenna was his only partner, and she was still far too weak. The courage skill could be obtained through a small chance by dodging an opponent's attacks repeatedly, but failure meant death. In other words, it was an incredibly dangerous skill to obtain, though it would also unlock the full potential of his evasion ability. All he needed now was an opponent capable of releasing powerful pressure without actually wanting to kill him. He kept wondering who could fit those conditions until a brilliant idea suddenly crossed his mind because there was someone like that at the dojo. When they arrived at the family gathering, the driver opened the car door and everyone stepped outside. His little sister looked extremely happy because she loved these reunions. The protagonist's father asked whether his older brothers had already arrived, and one of the employees confirmed that they had. The protagonist's mother then asked about the family elders, and the employee explained that they were currently talking in the library. Our hero commented that staying inside a room all day would be boring. Because of that, he wanted to head to the training grounds. After saying goodbye to his parents, he planned to stay there with his little sister. He asked whether she wanted to go have fun there with him. The girl excitedly answered yes. Once he arrived at the training field, he noticed several advanced training dummies set up there. He told Yuna to stay somewhere safe and avoid getting involved in any fights. At that moment, he realized the training machines were surprisingly powerful. She noticed some of their cousins practicing nearby and said she wanted to join the training too. He warned his sister that it was dangerous, but just then someone appeared behind him and complained that he was late. When he turned around, he saw his bully cousin, Sung. At that moment, he became furious because this was the perfect chance to get revenge. Sung walked over to Yuna and asked what she was doing there. He was clearly trying to intimidate his little sister. Ryu approached him and said he was actually glad to see Sung. Sung immediately got irritated and demanded to know what he meant by that. Poor Yuna could only watch as her brother started arguing again. Ryu mocked his cousin saying he had not been doing well thanks to a certain person, and added that he already knew Sung was the one who ordered the triplets to harass him. The boy grew angry, thinking his cousin had become way too bold. Sung had grown up in a very oppressive household. His father was strict and constantly pressured him to excel in training. Meanwhile, Ryu always received love and support from his father. Because of that, Sung developed deep jealousy toward his cousin, since his own father barely cared about him. The two had trained together at the dojo since childhood. Ryu always defeated him, which made Sung miserable, because he kept losing to someone considered one of the weakest members of the family. Still, Ryu was kind and always checked on his cousin afterward. Then one day, Sung realized he could strike Ryu from behind. He could not accept losing to him forever. So, acting cowardly and unfairly, he attacked Ryu from behind. Ryu crashed to the ground while Sung celebrated his victory. After that, he never stopped tormenting him. He knew that constantly beating Ryu would slowly destroy his confidence. Besides, hurting him became a way to vent his own frustration and envy. After every beating, Ryu would stay on the ground crying. That reaction was exactly what the bully wanted. From then on, the harassment only got worse both at school and at the academy. Sung thought he should have started doing that sooner, and every time they arrived at the dojo, he would threaten and intimidate Ryu again. Because of that, Ryu became even more timid over time. Back in the present, Sung was threatening Yuna again, but this time, Ryu challenged him to a duel. "You think you're tough, right? Then fight me." Naturally, Sung became furious. Meanwhile, Ryu's parents arrived at the library and immediately noticed the tense atmosphere. His mother even complained about the smell of smoke. Her husband asked if she was okay. She answered that she was fine. He only asked because he knew she hated these family gatherings since she was a commoner, and he had married her for love instead of status. Still, she smiled and told him not to worry about it. He thanked her for always trying so hard to make things work. Then he cast a protective bubble spell, so she would not have to smell the smoke anymore. At that moment, his older brother appeared and called out to Sanji. That man was Sung's father, and he constantly picked on his younger brother, Ryu's dad. The last time they spoke had been about Sung bullying Ryu. The man mocked Sanji, asking whether his son was traumatized from always getting beaten up. Ryu's mother had no idea her son was being bullied and immediately demanded an explanation from her husband. But then she noticed how furious he looked. He even slapped his older brother's hand away. The man angrily asked what his little brother thought he was doing. Furious, Sanji said Sanji should talk directly to Ryu so the boys could settle things themselves. But the man scoffed, saying his nephew was too cowardly to handle anything alone. Just then, several relatives rushed in saying the young masters were fighting. The man laughed, assuming his son was beating Ryu again. He even mocked his younger brother, telling him not to interfere in a fight between children. The other relatives were already drinking and cheering for the match. He invited the couple to watch and joked that they should not cry when their son lost. However, Sanji replied that Ryu was not as weak as everyone thought. The man refused to believe it and kept laughing, convinced his son would crush him. Deep down, Sanji feared his son would suffer bullying again, but he was even more worried about his wife's anger after learning what had been happening at the academy. She truly had no idea about any of it. Furious, she demanded every detail later. Sanji arrived at the arena with red marks still visible on his cheeks from the slap he had received. When they got there, Sung was already using the lion iron whip technique. Lena cried out in fear for her son, but Ryu calmly took a defensive stance and blocked the attack. Right after that, Sung mocked him by calling him a scared little rabbit. But the attack had been weak, so Ryu countered with a kick straight to his cousin's stomach. At that moment, Sung realized his cousin was no longer weak. The kick was so strong, it knocked the air out of him. Ryu laughed while mocking his cousin in return. Meanwhile, the family patriarch was taking a bath. He heard loud noises coming from outside, so he slowly stood up. Some servants informed him that the banquet was about to begin, though they hesitated to disturb him because a fight had broken out in the training hall. He asked which boys were fighting, and they answered that it was Ryu and Sung. The old man asked whether it was related to the bullying since he already knew about their history. The servants explained that Ryu himself had challenged his cousin to the duel. That made the old man find the situation quite interesting since Ryu was known for being weak and overly kind. The old man asked whether he could still catch the fight if he went there now. The servants answered that he probably could, so he began getting ready. He already assumed who the winner would be, but he still wanted to watch. After all, he would not miss the chance to see his grandsons fighting. Back at the dojo, the protagonist's mother was shocked. Not only had Ryu won, but he had completely humiliated his cousin. He even thought to himself that he had not done anything special. At that moment, a notification appeared saying one of his skills had leveled up. Wait, the fight ended that fast? Am I actually much stronger now? That jerk must be messing with me. They were the same age and had trained together at the dojo for years. However, after losing that first fight long ago, Ryu had become even more cowardly. Sung constantly encouraged the other cousins to mock him. In the original game story, Kong, the main protagonist, was supposed to defeat Sung. Afterward, the two of them would eventually become friends. But in this timeline, Ryu himself was the one who defeated his cousin. Still angry, he assumed Sung was only pretending to be furious and said he would not stop there. He wanted to teach him an even harsher lesson and started provoking him to get back up and continue fighting. Come on, get up already. Wake up. He poked the boy with his sword. Furious, he said he had not even done half of what he originally planned. Then he grabbed his cousin by the clothes and lifted him up. That was when he realized Suga had wet himself and mocked him for being so weak. Lena called out to Ryu in concern. At that moment, Suga's father arrived laughing, assuming his son had beaten Ryu again. What he did not expect was that his own son had lost and even wet his pants. Enraged, he demanded to know how Ryu dared to lay a hand on his son and shoved the protagonist. However, Sanji immediately started yelling at his older brother, and chaos quickly spread throughout the dojo. Even the protagonist thought he was doomed since he had started the whole mess. Sanji insisted his son had not cheated, but Suga's father claimed his child could never lose to a coward. Soon, they all began accusing Ryu of fighting unfairly. The boy even turned to his mother and asked her to stop the argument. Instead, she was already fighting with his aunt, while his little sister bit the woman. The entire place turned into complete chaos. Worried, he scratched his head and wondered how he could stop everything. Then an overwhelming aura suddenly filled the room, making everyone freeze instantly. The boy immediately recognized that terrifying presence. His grandfather had arrived. The old man asked whether they were trying to disgrace the Zan family. His name was Vang, and he demanded to know what his sons were doing. The two men stood there awkwardly without answering. Then Suga's father claimed that Ryu had started the fight by challenging his son. But old Vang said he did not want to hear the story from him and instead walked over to ask his grandson directly what had happened. He wanted to know whether Ryu had truly started the fight. With an intimidating voice, the old man asked his grandson if he was the one who challenged Suga. Just the pressure from his grandfather's aura made Ryu's legs shake. His grandfather was far more frightening than he remembered, felt like standing before a massive mountain. Trembling nervously, he admitted that he had started the fight and added that he had won fairly. His grandfather asked if it was true that he challenged Sug and defeated him. The boy answered yes and said the duel had been fair. He defeated his opponent without cheating. The family leader then ordered him to explain the battle in detail, and the boy described exactly how he defeated his cousin. He even suggested asking the relatives who had witnessed the match. Vang then asked why he grabbed his opponent after the fight, and Ryu explained that he thought Suga died because he was not responding. In truth, he simply wanted to hit the bully even more. Still, Suga's parents accused the protagonist of acting dishonorably by attacking after the duel ended. However, old Vang only laughed and commented that his grandson was quite interesting. Suga and his wife asked the patriarch whether Ryu would be punished, but the old man refused, saying the match had been fair. He even told his son to ask Suga directly whether Ryu had cheated. The boy had only been pretending to be unconscious to avoid further humiliation. His grandfather ordered him to stand up, and he finally admitted that Ryu had not cheated and that he simply lost because Ryu was stronger. The old man was somewhat cruel at that moment, because he forced the boy to openly admit he lost for being weaker. Just seeing his cousin suffer that humiliation was satisfying enough for Ryu. Fong then asked his son Sunjio whether that settled the matter. The family apologized since they had falsely accused the protagonist. Now that everything had been resolved, the old man declared that he did not want to hear any more arguments. With that, the matter was officially closed, and he invited everyone to dinner. He wanted all his children and grandchildren to enjoy the banquet together. However, he stopped at the door and said he still had one more thing to announce. After dinner, he wanted to personally test Ryu's training abilities in a sparring match. With a smile, he said he was looking forward to it and would be waiting for him. The boy then rejoined his family and let out a deep breath in relief. However, he suddenly heard his mother calling his name. With a stern expression, she said she wanted to talk to him. Then she asked if he understood what he had done wrong. Nervously, he answered that it was because he fought Sung and dragged his parents into the conflict. She told him that was not the issue and asked again, but he was terrified because it was the first time he had ever seen his mother this angry. He remembered his previous life when his mother constantly said she wished he had never been born. She repeated it many times and blamed him for her miserable life. Besides insulting him, she also treated him harshly. Because of that, he grew up believing his mother's suffering existed because of him. Sometimes she would hug him while crying and apologizing. He never knew whether she truly regretted her actions or simply felt guilty. Even so, he still loved her. One day, she left after saying she had found a job in another city. After that, he never saw her again. His mother abandoned him when he was 10 years old. As he entered his teenage years, he became bitter because he had grown up without affection from either parent. Now in the present, he feared this mother would abandon him too. So he begged for forgiveness, and she once again asked if he knew what he had done wrong. Worried, he thought he should apologize for being born, but then his mother suddenly hugged him tightly. She said his real mistake was hiding the bullying from her because she could have protected him. She even apologized for failing to notice that her son had been suffering alone. Gently patting his head, she said it must have been painful for him to endure all of that by himself, and she asked him to promise never to hide those things from her again. He realized this mother was completely different from the one in his previous life. He could truly feel her love and affection, so he hugged her tightly and cried, promising he would not keep any more secrets. Yuna also started crying because she had become emotional. The two of them ended up embracing their mother together. The boy's father jokingly said he wanted a hug too, but Lena replied that she still had not forgiven him. While he awkwardly tried to hug his wife anyway, the protagonist noticed a message arriving on his phone. He immediately checked it. It was a photo from Ravana saying she had reached the top of the mountain and planned to train even harder. He felt happy seeing how seriously she was working and laughed while calling her adorable. The hero's parents quickly realized he was falling for that girl. At that moment, someone knocked on the family's room and called for branch leader Sanji. The servant informed them that the banquet would begin soon and asked all the children and their families to head to the hall. The atmosphere there was extremely tense. The same man also went to notify Seiko's family. A few minutes after dinner, the evaluation match would begin. The girl confidently said she was ready. Then the Sacred Sword family's grand banquet was shown. That clan carried a legacy spanning 200 years. Because of that, Ryu viewed the family as deeply traditional. Still, something else caught his attention. He noticed Song's family acting timid and realized they were afraid their grandfather was still angry because of the earlier incident. When the grandfather entered the hall, he struck his sword against the floor and demanded silence. He thanked all the relatives for attending, especially since even more family members had gathered this year. Since everyone had traveled a long distance, they were hungry. So the grandfather announced that everyone should eat first, and dinner was served. The food tasted incredible. After a massive uprising, the world had fallen into chaos. During that dark era, humanity longed for protectors, or rather sanctuaries. To maintain their power, noble families took on the role of protecting humanity. That was how the sanctuaries were established, with a single purpose. Hunters defended humanity from the monsters emerging through portals. They carried enormous responsibility, but also earned great prestige. Eventually, society developed systems to train hunters, but only the original 10 families, such as the Sword family, had enough influence to educate them through their dojos. Since the protagonist's grandparents were extremely powerful and influential, they founded the Dozen family. From a distance, the boy watched his grandfather greeting the other grandchildren. Without question, Seiko was his favorite granddaughter. She had already mastered the beast technique. The other relatives reacted in disbelief and questioned whether it was true. Ryu noticed that his cousin had become the center of attention, while the grandfather scolded his children for doubting her talent. If she continued improving at that pace, she would surely become the second strongest head of the family. The grandfather hoped she would grow into a powerful leader capable of surpassing him someday. Smiling confidently, Seiko promised to keep doing her best. It amazed him that she could stand beside their grandfather without showing fear. The boy thought she truly must be incredibly strong. At that moment, their eyes met, and he quickly became nervous while trying to hide it. The grandfather noticed the interaction and quietly laughed to himself. Then he mentioned that Seiko's growth reminded him of news involving a certain rogue. Ryu immediately understood that his grandfather was referring to the demonic duelist, an extremely powerful master, and also Kang's mentor, the protagonist of the game. Ryu recognized that character because he appeared early in the game's story. The demonic duelist had first taken interest in Kong while the boy was training at the orphanage. Once Kong left the orphanage at 17 years old, he immediately began training under that master. In the game's original story, there was also a chance for Ravenna to train alongside Kong, and he realized he had already changed that future. At this point in the story, the duelist had already chosen Kong as his disciple, though nobody there knew who the boy was yet. The old man already knew that the demonic duelist had accepted a student. Worse yet, they wanted a duel. Basically, the duelist intended to pit his disciple against one of the Zan family grandchildren. As soon as the grandfather announced it, the grandchildren became nervous. The old man said they could not refuse the challenge because it would damage the family's reputation. With confidence, he declared that he would show that shameless duelist the true strength of the Zan family. Seiko said she would do her best, and the other grandchildren also promised to try hard. Our protagonist stated that he would give it everything he had. Still, deep down, he was terrified of facing the game's protagonist since that never happened in the original storyline. Someone suddenly slammed a hand against the table, and it was Shang announcing that he would exceed his grandfather's expectations just as his father had taught him. His father always told him that even a lion hunts a rabbit with full effort. Hearing that, our hero laughed quietly, knowing Shang would eventually get destroyed by Kong anyway. But the grandfather asked Ryu why he was laughing and what he found amusing. The boy immediately became nervous while the old man kept insisting on an answer. In truth, was laughing because he already knew the game story and understood that Kong would completely overpower Sum. Terrified of the grandfather, his father quickly made excuses, claiming his son was simply in a good mood. The old man stepped closer and questioned him again. He wanted to know exactly why Ryu laughed. "Yes, son. You're in trouble now." Ryu awkwardly explained that he had laughed because of what Sun's father said. He was not laughing at his grandfather. The old man ordered his grandson to explain himself clearly. A huge lion giving everything it had just to hunt a rabbit sounded strange to him. That was the reason he laughed. If a lion truly needed maximum effort, then the lion itself must be weak. By that logic, the lion was worthless, which made him laugh. But after noticing how serious his grandfather looked, he quickly apologized. To his surprise, the old man burst out laughing and admitted he had never considered it that way before. Resting a hand on his chin, Vung said he would think more about what his grandson had said. Everyone there realized the old man favored the boy and had high expectations for Ryu. Then the elder suddenly remembered something and told everyone to pay attention. He announced that they would hold training inside a portal that very day. Hearing that, the protagonist remembered his grandfather mentioning it earlier, though Sanji worried the children were not prepared. Another son asked about the portal's difficulty level. The old man replied that a white rank portal would be far too easy for the Zahn family. That was why they would use a yellow key portal for the test. The portal had already been prepared, and the children stood outside beside their parents. The old man got ready to open it. He gave his grandchildren one final chance to refuse the training and leave. Then an intense light illuminated the entire area. A powerful wind blew from inside the magical portal. When he opened his eyes, he saw a beautiful landscape. Everyone had entered the dungeon. The grandfather explained that the mission was simple. As the status window showed, their strategy was to descend the cliff first. He pointed toward a nearby lake and explained that a rank 3 monster lived beneath the water there. He also mentioned sealing the creature inside the lake so it could not escape. That reassured the parents somewhat. Even Ryu admitted that fighting a rank 3 monster underwater would have been nearly impossible. However, the grandfather warned them not to underestimate the creature because it was still extremely dangerous. The boy already knew how powerful that monster was, which made him feel discouraged. Still, he could not give up because this would be a great chance to become stronger. He also understood that reaching the lake itself would not be easy since descending the mountain would be difficult enough already. Old man Vang told them not to worry too much because the monsters along the way were not especially dangerous. At that moment, an employee arrived carrying a briefcase, making Ryu curious. Inside were camera collars the children would wear, so the adults could monitor everything in real time from above. There was also a portal watch. If they ended up in danger, they could call for help. The grandfather handed both items to his grandchildren and explained that the evaluation would last around 3 hours. Once they defeated the boss, they were supposed to unlock the portal with the key. Everyone was ready to begin the trial. Lena wished her son good luck and reminded him not to get hurt. Completely confident, the boy assured her that he would be fine and told her not to worry. Old man Vang even celebrated, saying his 2 grandsons seemed to be getting along well, though that was far from the truth. The moment the signal was given, the test began, and the boys rushed toward the lake as quickly as possible, but our hero suddenly tripped and rolled down the slope. At the last second, he grabbed the rope again, then kicked off a rock and jumped farther down. After reaching a flatter section of the valley, he received a notification warning that a monster was nearby. Something suddenly caught his attention when a projectile flew toward his leg. Luckily, his evasion instinct activated, and when he looked up, he realized the attackers were rank 1 pouch monkeys. Those pouch monkeys specialized in throwing objects, and the creatures quickly prepared another barrage while the boy relied on his evasion skill to dodge everything. Since too many projectiles were flying at once, he also had to block with his sword. He soon realized the monsters were hurling rocks, so he swung his blade and sent one straight back at a monkey. That only made the others even angrier. As the rocks kept coming, Ryu knocked them away with increasing force. One of the small monkeys was finally slammed to the ground. Joking around, he said he had just hit a home run. The monkeys clearly had not expected that. After a while, he managed to defeat them all. He spent roughly 35 minutes fighting those creatures. Still, his real concern was the upcoming boss battle. At that moment, he noticed one monkey holding a fruit. Since he had played the game before, he recognized it as a vitality fruit. Excited, he immediately grabbed it. With a sly grin, he realized he could make great use of it. Meanwhile, the family members above were watching their children through the monitors. One relative started panicking because their child had been injured by a monster, and Lena immediately became worried as well. Shung's father bragged that his son was the strongest and would crush all the other grandchildren. The man was acting incredibly arrogant. Even the protagonist's parents were getting tired of his attitude. At the same time, Seiko was using her lightning techniques. It was the 5th form of the Beast King attack style, Lion Strike. Shung's father stared in shock, asking how his niece had already mastered techniques like that. The grandfather laughed proudly and praised Seiko's talent. Still, he was concerned because his grandchildren were burning through too much mana. By the time they reached the boss fight, they might already be exhausted. Shung's father confidently claimed his son would do fine and told his father not to worry. Suddenly, loud noise drew everyone's attention. The old man turned toward the screen and saw Ryu launching a monkey through the air. Everyone began wondering what the boy was doing. Shungji and Lena became concerned, thinking their son was not taking the training seriously because he seemed to be fooling around. Down below, however, the boy was eating vitality fruits while commenting on how powerful their effects were. Watching carefully, the grandfather tried to figure out what his grandson was planning. Shung's father mocked Ryu again, claiming the boy was treating the training like a game and ignoring the grandfather's challenge. As they watched the screen, they saw him batting rocks away, and the old man quickly understood what Ryu was doing. He even commented that the boy had excellent instincts. Still trying to stir trouble, Shung's father pointed at the screen and complained that Ryu had even stopped to have a snack instead of training seriously. "Look at that, father," he went on saying. The boy clearly had no sense of danger if he could stop in the middle of the test just to eat fruit. In the background, Sanji grew irritated. However, old Vang told him to pay closer attention and asked whether he even recognized the fruit Ryu was eating. It was a stamina fruit that restored vitality. Vang even praised Sanji, saying he had raised Ryu very well. Then he pointed at the screen for everyone to watch carefully. In truth, Ryu had been finding different fruits inside the monkeys, which was why he kept knocking them back. Rubbing his chin, the old man remarked that his grandson was clever in gathering the fruits to increase his strength. Meanwhile, Sanji tried to hide his confusion because he had never taught his son any of that. The hero only knew because he had already played the game before. After some time, he had eaten several different fruits, boosting his stats. The blue endurance fruit, however, tasted awful. As he kept moving, he gradually approached the lake. He had also collected so many fruits that he could barely carry them all. At that point, it looked like he could open a fruit stand with that amount. He realized escaping with all those fruits would be impossible because there were simply too many. He even considered hiding them inside the monkey's pouches. After thinking it over, he decided it was actually a great idea, so he cut off the furry pouch and stuffed all the fruits inside it. After removing the other pouches from the monkeys, he made several small bags and hung them across his body. With that done, he started jumping from branch to get closer to the lake. He had wasted a lot of time gathering fruit, so now he needed to hurry. But then something suddenly caught his attention. There were even more of those monkeys throwing rocks at him. Ryu already knew he had to take down the monkey leader, otherwise, monsters would keep chasing after him non-stop. Aggro locked for real. But he didn't have time to deal with that, guys, so he tried to escape and eventually stumbled into a swampy area filled with thick mud. The entire place looked different now, with shorter trees and a much heavier humid atmosphere. That was when he realized the environment had completely changed. In the game, whenever the surroundings shifted this drastically, it usually meant the monsters in that zone were entirely different too. And that was when the boy noticed a blue frog standing right in front of him. These forest mud frogs were actually pretty dangerous, and taking on 4 of them at once was definitely not going to be easy. Even fighting a single frog was already a nightmare because of its paralyzing poison. Nature really said good luck surviving. At the same time though, he had heard rumors that the antidote for that paralysis could also be found somewhere inside this forest. So he started carefully moving through the bushes, and after several long minutes, the boy began getting irritated because he still couldn't find the so-called antidote. However, something suddenly caught his attention. It was the rare flower that grew near the frog's habitat, the most famous antidote against paralysis. He had gotten incredibly lucky and immediately picked the flower. If he ever became paralyzed, he could use it later. But then the boy decided to just eat the flower right away in order to build resistance against paralysis. The problem was that the taste was absolutely disgusting, guys. Bro looked like he just ate expired medicine from a dungeon chest. At that moment, he heard a noise nearby and instantly hit himself. Down below, he spotted someone fighting against a red frog, and that monster, the red frog, was also extremely powerful. Right then, the frog unleashed its paralyzing poison on that boy. The voice sounded strangely familiar to him, but since he was too far away, Ryu couldn't tell who it was for sure. He even started wondering whether or not he should help his cousin, especially since almost none of his cousins ever treated him well anyway. That was when he noticed the other frogs also making their way down there. Now the boy would have to face not only the red frog, but the blue frogs as well. Ryu quickly searched for a higher place where he could escape and hide. And with one leap, he jumped upward, thankful that the monsters hadn't noticed him yet. Sneak levels somehow maxed out, but at the very last second, Ryu chose to help. And after jumping forward, he prepared himself to strike the frog. The monsters all looked upward, and with electricity gathering around him, he prepared his electrifying aerial attack. In an instant, every single frog was struck by the attack. Afterward, he put away his weapon and extended his hand, asking whether the boy had gotten hurt. At that moment, Ryu confirmed that it really was his cousin Sing, and the bully was standing there furious, saying he never needed Ryu's help in the first place. Right then, Ryu realized his cousin was hopeless. And honestly, it probably would have been better if he had just walked away and left the guy there suffering. He even asked Sing why he was getting humiliated by monsters that week, and the guy immediately started yelling, claiming that Ryu had actually interrupted his hunt. But our protagonist fired back, saying that his cousin was nothing but a complete liar. And just like that, the two of them started arguing. At that moment, one of the blue frogs suddenly returned. Our protagonist remembered there had been 4 blue frogs, not 3, which meant one of them had been hiding the entire time. He looked at his cousin and came up with a brilliant idea, saying that since Sing complained about him stealing the hunt, then he would leave this frog for him to handle alone. And just like that, he ran away, leaving his cousin there paralyzed by poison and forced to deal with the monster himself. Cold. Absolutely cold. At that moment, the frog let out a loud croak, and we could see Sing already trembling in fear. Meanwhile, the boy's parents were watching everything from the top of the mountain. Sing's father was furious because Ryu had abandoned his son behind. He even went over to complain to his father, saying that Ryu was a complete coward for refusing to help his son. But then Sanji stepped in and started defending Ryu instead. Old Vang asked Sanji what exactly the boy was supposed to do in a situation like that. And our protagonist's father responded that everyone had to survive on their own, while also mocking his brother-in-law by asking if his son couldn't handle himself alone. At that moment, the grandfather placed his hand on the protagonist's father's shoulder and admitted that he agreed with Sanji, saying his grandsons needed to learn how to survive by themselves. At the same time, Old V was slightly surprised because his youngest son was openly standing against his brother-in-law. That's because, guys, our protagonist's father was usually very peaceful and always let his brothers walk all over him. Old Vang stared upward with a serious expression because he was carefully analyzing his grandson's abilities. Ryu possessed an incredibly powerful blue lightning ability, and the old man was honestly shocked by this because, until now, his grandson Ryu had always looked like a completely helpless bunny. Our hero comments that reaching the lake has been way harder than expected, but the moment he looks ahead, he becomes shocked. That's because after several hours, he had finally arrived at the lake, which was the main objective all along. Some of his cousins were already there, and it looked like they were getting completely overwhelmed by the aquatic monster. Ryu immediately asked what had happened to them, and standing there was Seiko herself. Ryu was stunned because she moved so quickly that he could barely follow her movements. But there was something even more terrifying than that. That creature was the spiritual monster, and the girl was fighting it completely alone. She was using advanced techniques, but none of them seemed to be working. To make things worse, the monster was even creating multiple water clones, boss fight mechanics getting ridiculous at this point. The situation was incredibly dangerous, forcing Seiko to retreat. She suddenly cried out, and our hero immediately became worried, thinking she had been struck. But in reality, she was suffering from the effects of the paralyzing poison. Ryu knew he had to step in now because otherwise, his cousin could end up suffering even worse injuries. On the edge of the lake, the other cousins were completely terrified. With those fruits, he knew he could restore some of his cousin's energy so they could fight at full power again. And honestly, that sounded like a really solid plan. If possible, he could hand out all the fruits so everyone could battle at maximum strength and increase their chances of winning. Buff distribution arc begins. Meanwhile, Seiko was still trapped in the middle of the lake with her leg paralyzed from the poison. And to make matters even worse, countless monsters surrounded her from every direction. The creatures immediately launched an attack against the girl. For a moment, she truly believed this would be the end for her. Even so, she refused to give up and slowly took a deep breath. Then she used every last bit of strength remaining in her body to defend herself. This was the King of Beasts style 6th form. With that technique, she managed to slice through the water clones. A powerful flash of light burst across the battlefield, and now she unleashed the lion's impetuous dance, a blue lightning technique. With that attack, she cut through the water clones once again. We could already tell the girl was insanely strong, guys, and she even activated the third form of the King of Beasts style. However, the paralysis started spreading into her arms, and she realized she wouldn't be able to block the next attack. Now she was truly in danger. But right at that moment, Ryu suddenly appeared and quickly told her that he would attack from the right while she only needed to focus on the left side. She glanced to the left and saw the monster charging directly toward her. Yeah. Definitely not the kind of thing you want sprinting at you. At the same time, he also activated his blue lightning technique while trying to protect her. The girl even wondered who this boy was, but after getting a better look at him, she finally recognized him. It was her cousin, the same so-called useless boy everyone always mocked. She even asked why he had chosen to help her. And with surprising courage, he answered that he wanted to cooperate with her to defeat the monster together. At that moment, her body could barely move anymore. She thought it was all over, but our protagonist willingly put his own life on the line just to save her. And together, the two of them managed to destroy those water clones. The girl realized he wasn't the worthless failure everyone claimed he was. He then called out to Seiko and pointed toward himself. With complete confidence, Ryu asked whether she would be willing to cooperate with him. The girl immediately hesitated. Cooperate? Could they really work together? Wasn't this supposed to be an individual challenge? He then explained that, if they tried fighting the monster one-on-one, none of them would stand a chance. As he looked toward his cousin, Seiko, he remembered how she appeared later in the game when she was older. The other cousins also entered the lake to join the battle, and Seiko immediately told them to fall back so they could come up with a strategy first. Meanwhile, high above on the mountain, the parents nervously watched everything unfold while old Vang remained completely silent. The parents were terrified because their children were fighting on the surface of the water itself, and that made the entire situation extremely dangerous. Some of them even tried to get old Vang's attention, saying their children were in serious danger. The eldest son suggested lowering the difficulty of the training. After all, those kids were still weak compared to adults. Because of that, he believed it would be better to make things easier for them. Old Vang stroked his chin thoughtfully, starting to wonder if he had pushed them too hard. However, he suddenly remembered someone named Zhang and mentioned that the boy was that man's disciple and was destined to become an even greater monster. He refused to watch his grandchildren lose to that boy, which was why he had prepared such brutal training for them. The eldest son once again asked his father to reconsider and make the training easier, and the old man admitted that maybe it would be for the best. He even said he would lower the difficulty, but then something suddenly caught his attention. He noticed that his grandson Ryu was organizing an alliance between all the cousins, and naturally, old Vang became pleased immediately. Plot twist unlocked. He declared that he would not lower the difficulty after all. First, he wanted to see exactly what the kids were planning, because it looked like his grandson still had a hidden card to play. Ryu proposed forming an alliance, but his cousins instantly complained that they wouldn't cooperate with him because he was weak and nothing more than a useless failure. However, Seiko stepped in and told them to trust Ryu because she had personally seen that he wasn't a failure, and she even admitted she couldn't defeat the monster alone and needed everyone's help. Besides that, there was something important that only Ryu possessed. The boys immediately asked Seiko what exactly Ryu had that was so important, and she remembered that he had handed her one of those magical fruits earlier. Our boy simply laughed and dumped all the magical fruits and flowers out of his backpack. Those were healing items and physical enhancement materials, but the cousins instantly became suspicious, thinking Ryu was trying to trick them somehow. But our protagonist explained that if they refused to cooperate, every single one of them would lose, and he was even offering the fruits to them for free. If they ate the red fruit, their strength would recover immediately. On top of that, all the adults were watching them from above, which meant the boys needed to prove they weren't useless. If they received a low score during their grandfather's training, they would become a disgrace to the family. Because of that, he proposed that all of them work together. There were only 52 minutes left before the training time limit ended, guys. Time pressure hitting harder than the boss itself. After hearing that, everyone finally agreed and ate the fruits. But suddenly, someone appeared while shouting Ryu's name, and we saw that it was his cousin Sung. Our hero simply turned around and asked if he was still alive. But the boy became furious and immediately snatched the fruit from our protagonist's hand. Ryu only allowed his cousin to eat the fruit because the more people helping in the battle, the better their chances would be. The boy then clapped his hands to get everyone's attention and asked if they had already recovered their strength because now they needed to discuss the strategy, and he proceeded to explain the entire plan to his cousins. Seiko would handle the right side of the boss while he would attack from the left. Seiko even asked if she really had to take the right side. He assigned her there because she was stronger than him and because the monster's left arm had already been cut off, which would make it easier for him to attack from that direction. After explaining everything, they finally began putting the plan into action. Everyone charged toward the monster in an attempt to draw its attention away. Ryu even asked one of his cousins to distract the minions so they could create an opening and push forward. The boy immediately agreed, saying he would provide all the support he could. And just like that, all the cousins charged from every possible direction, trying to confuse the monster and throw the battlefield into chaos. Raid boss mechanics officially activated. Meanwhile, Ryu and Seiko took advantage of the distraction and moved in from the flanks. The two of them advanced side by side, and after taking several hits, the monster started screaming loudly. The creature was growing irritated because the humans were suddenly fighting in perfect coordination. Because of that, it refused to stay on the defensive and began casting its spells. As the monster gathered a massive amount of power, it shouted that it would wipe out all those useless humans. Seiko quickly realized that the magic attack was aimed directly at her. And in that instant, her whole life flashed before her eyes. At the very last moment, Seiko managed to dodge by leaping backward. Ryu noticed that the monster still had techniques it hadn't revealed yet. And during the counterattack, Seiko activated the offensive style of the King of Beasts' third form. Then she unleashed the lion's iron divider, slicing the monster straight through the middle. However, even that wasn't enough to defeat the creature. Meanwhile, our protagonist sprinted toward the rear of the battlefield and activated the first form of the offensive King of Beasts style. That technique was called Lion's Fury, and it struck the monster mermaid directly in the back. But the creature barely avoided the attack, taking only a shallow hit. Seiko knew it would be extremely difficult to land another clean strike against the monster. With a furious expression, the creature began cursing at them. She understood that, among all those kids, these two were the most troublesome opponents. Ryu knew time was running out, so they needed to act fast. They still had the advantage, which meant they had to keep applying pressure. And with that, the two of them rushed forward at full speed once again. The monster looked like it was preparing another attack, so both of them retreated, and Seiko said she would stay there and try to protect him. After quietly whispering a new strategy to Ryu, the two charged in once again. This time, they unleashed several techniques simultaneously, leaving the monster unable to decide which attack to defend against. After pulling back, Ryu asked Seiko if she had managed to hit the monster, and she replied that the cut had only been superficial. Still, even if the damage was minor, they were finally managing to injure the creature. At that moment, the monster tried to slam its tail directly into Ryu's face, but he dodged the attack. Close call. Bro almost got sent into spectator mode. This monster clearly had plenty of hidden tricks left. The creature angrily claimed that if its arm had still been intact, it would have already crushed all the children. First, it planned to eliminate the boy who was acting as the mastermind behind the attack. But Seiko suddenly appeared behind the creature and sliced off its tail. She even mocked the mermaid by asking where exactly it was looking. The creature let out a painful scream, and Ryu immediately took advantage of the opening to charge forward with full force. This was the defensive style of the King of Beasts. Third form, Lion Barrier. The two of them were moving in complete synchronization. And from the observation screens above, even the adults started commenting on how perfectly coordinated the pair was. Xing was absolutely boiling with jealousy because his own son wasn't standing out at all, while old Vang kept praising those two non-stop. Furious, he demanded to know how Ryu was managing to fight on the same level as Seiko. One of the parents suddenly shouted for everyone to look because Seiko was using blue lightning once again. That was an advanced technique, and old Vang looked incredibly proud of his granddaughter. However, there was something else catching his attention. It was the fact that our protagonist, who was 2 years younger than her, was also capable of using that same technique. Ryu began breathing deeply, trying to sharpen every single one of his senses to the limit. And the moment he opened his eyes, he felt like he had finally understood how the technique truly worked. The parents immediately started shouting in amazement, saying these children were unbelievable. Not even the clan leader could believe what he was witnessing. The old man was completely shocked. Guys, that's because our protagonist had fully activated blue lightning, and that was extremely dangerous because the spell itself could destroy their bodies. Power up with self-damage included. Truly an anime classic. And just like that, both of the kids unleashed the King of Beasts technique together. Fifth form, the creature immediately screamed that it needed to dodge or it would die. Then both Ryu and his cousin launched themselves forward with the lion assault. And with that attack, the monster was split apart by 2 diagonal slashes. Overfilling with aura, they completely cleared the portal. The adults simply couldn't believe what they had just seen. Laughing proudly, old Vang declared that his grandchildren were truly incredible. All this time, he believed Ryu was nothing more than a weak little rabbit. But now he realized the boy was actually a lion cub. Suddenly, notifications began appearing. Ryu had earned a brand new title called Lion Cub. He now had the option to replace his current title with this new one. The boy turned towards Seiko and told her she fought really well, and she praised him in return. Whenever he obtained a new title, he would gain additional rewards along with new stat bonuses. However, he felt a little hesitant about accepting the Lion Cub title. And remember guys, he was the only person who could actually see these status notifications. Still, he felt happy because he had received this notification thanks to finally earning recognition from his grandfather. Back in the past, everyone looked at him like he was nothing more than a miserable little rabbit. Not even Grandfather Vang paid attention to him before. The notification asked whether he wanted to replace the rabbit title with the Lion Cub title. This new title would grant him a 10% increase to his strength-related abilities. However, the rabbit title gave him much higher luck stats, around 30% extra. So he started thinking carefully because if he replaced the rabbit title, his evasion would drop drastically, min-maxing stats in real life now. Because of that, he decided not to switch titles for the time being. At that moment, his cousin asked why he was standing there frozen while staring at the portal message. And since she couldn't see his status notifications, he awkwardly tried to play it off, saying he was just looking at the portal message to read some of the information written there. After the key was handed to her, the girl decided to give it to Ryu as a gift. She explained that the entire strategy had actually been his idea, which meant he deserved to keep the key. If he hadn't suggested working together as a team, they never would have been able to defeat the monster. That was exactly why she had already made up her mind to hand the key over to our boy. And in an incredibly adorable way, she thanked him. The guy even started blushing from embarrassment. Bro's emotional defense stat instantly dropped to 0. And just like that, he accepted the key. At that moment, someone suddenly appeared behind them. It was one of the adults congratulating them for successfully clearing the portal. He even asked them to hand over the portal key so he could deliver it to the clan leader. The boy became slightly disappointed because the key he had worked so hard to earn would now end up with Grandfather Vang. Right after that, he mentioned that he had one question to ask. He wanted to know what would happen to the loot dropped by the defeated monster. At that moment, the adult replied that he would check with the captain to see whether the kids were allowed to keep the items. Then the grandfather declared that the winner would be allowed to keep the monster's loot. And our boy became incredibly excited, because that meant he could claim the creature's magical items. He even told his cousin that she had fought really well too, and that he would split the rewards with her. However, the girl wasn't interested at all, and told him he could keep everything. That monster was ranked 3, which meant the items inside its body were probably extremely high-level treasures. He eventually picked up a shining jewel. He had no idea what rank that magical stone was, but it definitely looked like something very valuable. However, something else suddenly caught his curiosity. There was a strange glow shining from the bottom of the lake. He reached his hand down and managed to grab the stone. That was an intermediate-level physical enhancement magic stone. He was completely shocked because that kind of stone was incredibly rare. RNG gods finally blessing the protagonist for once. Turning toward his cousin, he thanked her because she had allowed him to keep everything. In response, Seiko explained that those stones were extremely valuable, so they should take them to an appraiser first. He felt a little disappointed but agreed. Though right after that, she congratulated him because he had also managed to use blue lightning, leaving the boy feeling awkward and shy. I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's definitely a little chemistry starting between those two. Just look at this shameless grin on the guy's face. After climbing back up the mountain, Grandfather Vang started laughing while praising how impressive the abilities of his 2 grandchildren were. Meanwhile, the uncles were using healing techniques to restore everyone's stamina. Right after that, Vang gently patted the boy on the head and told him to continue training humbly without ever slowing down. They shouldn't get arrogant just because they had broken the record for defeating that monster at their age. The boy couldn't even remember the last time his grandfather had praised him, so he was unbelievably happy. Once again, that notification appeared asking whether he wanted to replace the rabbit title with lion cub, but this time he finally accepted it. Then, turning toward his grandfather, the boy courageously said that he wanted to make a request. He wanted permission to enter the divine swordsmanship family treasury, and the old man stared directly at his grandson. That place contained countless rare treasures, and soon they were escorted there. He felt a little nervous because he feared his grandfather might refuse. All of the family members followed Ryu and Seiko together. His father even walked over and told the boy he had done an amazing job during the test. Still looking suspicious, Sanji asked his son how he knew the properties of those fruits, especially since he had never taught him that information. He even pinched the boy's cheeks while asking how he knew the fruits weren't poisonous because recklessly eating random forest fruit was insanely dangerous. Survival instincts apparently replaced common sense. Right after that, he asked Seiko why she kept staring at him. The girl replied that it was because he seemed to get along very well with his family. He then asked whether she got along with her own family too, and she answered that it was only somewhat okay. Soon after, they finally arrived at the Grand Treasury Hall. That was the place where most of the treasures belonging to the main Doan family house were stored, and they were among the very few children in the family's history who had ever earned the right to enter that treasury. Then the grandfather opened the doors for both of them and told them to choose one weapon each, and the moment they stepped inside, they were completely stunned. They were allowed to take any intermediate-level treasure they wanted, so the two of them started walking around the room, searching for the weapon they would choose. And the quality of the items there was unbelievably high, guys. There were even thunder elixirs capable of granting absurd amounts of power. There was also a blue gate key that could allow someone to enter the training chamber where Kong, the protagonist of the game, had once trained. But then Seiko called out to Ryu, saying there were other rooms further down that side. And just like that, she invited her cousin to go take a look. They arrived at an area filled with legendary swords. There was one sword in particular that immediately caught their attention. The boy knew that sword would eventually be used by the future leader of the divine swordsmanship family. He even told her that she should choose one of those legendary swords because it perfectly matched her fighting style. And the moment the girl looked at the sword she would wield later in the game's story, she became completely mesmerized. The boy already knew she would use that sword in the future during the game's storyline. Because of that, he was already imagining how she would react. He quickly grabbed the sword and told her she should definitely choose that item. Feeling a little shy, she asked whether he didn't want the sword for himself, but he refused. He even explained that the Mist Beast sword didn't really suit him because his powers were different from hers. As he handed the sword over to his cousin, he told her that it matched her perfectly. Then she gently touched the sheath, and with an adorable smile full of excitement, she said she absolutely loved the sword. He also smiled happily and told her to take good care of the weapon. Right after that, he started searching for a weapon that would suit his own fighting style. He simply took one step to the side and reached for a sword. That was the exact weapon he had chosen. He even wondered if the strange feeling he was experiencing right now was the same thing Seiko had felt a few moments earlier. It was almost as if the sword itself had chosen him. He could feel the blade calling out to him, and when he unsheathed it, he realized it was no ordinary sword. It possessed an incredibly powerful and durable blue blade. The stats of that sword were insanely high. Loot rarity just casually breaking the system. And when Seiko saw the weapon, she immediately commented on how cool its design looked. The blade carried a reverse symbol of vulnerability engraved into it. He knew that simply by holding this weapon, his power level had already increased dramatically. With a sword like this, he could easily kill all of his enemies. But after remembering Ravana, he decided he didn't want to kill anyone because his goal was to guide the girl toward becoming peaceful. That meant he needed to set a good example himself. He even started rushing Seiko, saying they should hurry up and leave because everyone outside was already waiting for them, and now they would walk out carrying their brand new weapons. Outside the room, the grandfather praised them, saying both of them had made excellent choices. He even reminded them to take proper care of the swords because they were extremely powerful weapons. The boy nodded while gripping the sword tightly. Right after that, he called out to the patriarch. He explained that since he had obtained a new weapon, he also wanted a new form of training. Because of that, he wished to learn a technique directly from his grandfather. The moment everyone heard that, they were completely shocked. The guy really had guts, guys. Not only did he ask for a treasure, but now he was also requesting a sparring session with his own grandfather, the patriarch of the Zan family. Bro really unlocked fearless dialogue options overnight. But instead of getting angry, the old man laughed while stroking his beard and admitted that it had been a very long time since he last trained with his sons, let alone his grandchildren. He even declared that he wouldn't train only Ryu, but all of the grandchildren gathered there. Ryu bowed respectfully and thanked him for the opportunity. The only reason he was able to do something like this was because he had finally acquired the courage skill he had been searching for. Soon after that, they all headed toward the dojo to begin basic training. Sanji stood there cheering for our protagonist alongside his wife and Ryu's little sister, who was happily jumping around nearby. As he approached his son, the boy's father warned him to stay focused throughout the fight because Grandfather Vang would definitely not hold back. No matter what though, this was an incredible opportunity to train with his grandfather and learn new skills. After all, guys, old Vang was considered one of the strongest people in the entire world. The boy stepped toward his grandfather, and after the old man drew a wooden sword, he told the boy to fight with his full strength. Ryu knew his grandfather was only testing him, but of course, he wasn't going to use all his power because that might force the old man to respond with even more strength. After drawing his sword, he declared that he wanted to fight against the strongest swordsman in the world. The grandfather realized that his grandson truly possessed the determination to become stronger and was no longer the timid little rabbit he used to be. The old man even became a little embarrassed by the praise and said he wasn't actually the strongest person in the world. However, he still wanted to demonstrate one of the basic techniques he knew. Since he also possessed the beast sword techniques, he decided to show them to his grandson. As he raised his sword, he explained that the skill was incredibly powerful. And the moment Ryu faced his grandfather directly, he was overwhelmed with fear because the old man looked like a monster unleashed from its cage. Yeah. That is definitely not a friendly aura. His entire body started trembling uncontrollably. Several status windows suddenly appeared, warning him to be careful. It felt as though he were standing in front of a massive mountain. The old man even said that if this had been a real battle, the boy would already be dead. That lesson was meant to teach him never to freeze in fear before an opponent. At that exact moment, the old man moved in the blink of an eye and struck the boy with the sword. Everyone watching was shocked because Ryu was sent flying backward. He managed to lessen some of the impact by jumping back repeatedly until he finally slammed into the wall with his back. After collapsing onto the ground, he realized that the difference in power between the two of them was absurd. His grandfather wasn't even on a human level anymore. Ryu kept thinking to himself. It was obvious that his grandfather was more than 1,000 times stronger than him. He could even feel the judgmental stares coming from his relatives. But with that single exchange alone, the old man had already realized the boy was unbelievably skilled. The attack had been insanely fast, yet Ryu still managed to block it using his own sword. At the last possible moment, he not only blocked the strike but also redirected the force of the attack, greatly reducing the impact. In other words, if the boy hadn't done that, the blow definitely would have knocked him unconscious. Lying flat on his back, he complained that he was out of breath. And while laughing, the old man admitted that his grandson was actually a terrifying child. The boy couldn't understand why the old man kept saying he was amazing. As he walked closer, the grandfather told him that he still had enough energy left to survive another strike. That was why he needed to stand back up. How am I supposed to stand up? You're trying to kill me at this point. However, he realized that his grandfather had finally acknowledged his potential. And at that same instant, a status window appeared before his eyes. He had obtained the courage skill at level 1, and he even thanked the system, saying that this reward was actually incredible. The grandfather looked at him and asked what exactly he was talking about. Trying to play it off, he quickly said that he wasn't planning to train again because his whole body was already completely wrecked. Sanji asked whether his son was really that injured, and after confirming that the boy was fine, he walked over to speak privately with his own father. After standing back up, the boy watched his father having that conversation. Thanks to Ryu's request, the old man had decided to train not only the grandchildren, but all of his sons as well. And Ryu realized that both his father and uncles were genuinely scared of training with Grandfather Vang. Honestly, understandable reaction. Once the training ended, Yuna ran over to her father, saying she was worried he might get hurt. Meanwhile, our protagonist became curious about what exactly his father had been discussing so seriously with his grandfather. However, Sanji simply patted his son on the head and said it was nothing important. Still, the boy remained suspicious because it definitely looked like his father had been talking about something serious. After that, we saw that the grandfather had truly stopped holding back during the training with his grandchildren, and every single one of them ended up injured, including Seiko. When it became Sang's turn, he was trembling in fear so badly that the moment he got hit, he was launched flying backward with blood pouring from his nose. And someone immediately took advantage of that opening to snap a picture. And of course, it turned out to be our protagonist sitting inside the car laughing because his cousin had gotten absolutely destroyed by the grandfather. The old man already knew that those two grandchildren were the strongest among them and would benefit the most from their new weapons. Inside the car, Ryu quietly gave thanks for the amazing day he had, since he had managed to become much stronger. Soon after, they returned home to begin another week filled with battles and training. That night, he was already resting in his room, and the boy was so happy about getting that sword that he literally slept beside it. Yuna was also sleeping while hugging her stuffed animal, but we could see that Lena was alone in her bed. That was because Sanji remained deep in thought after the conversation he had with his father. During that discussion, the old man had told Sanji that he needed to become stronger in order to protect his son Ryu. That was because his other brothers disliked Sanji and constantly caused problems for him. Because of that, he would need to become stronger and eventually stand against his own brothers. All of this was necessary if he wanted to keep his family safe. After all, fierce competition inside the Zan family was completely normal. He gripped the railing tightly and declared that he would become stronger. The next day, our protagonist was exchanging messages with Seiko, and he was surprised because she used incredibly cute emojis. He even found it funny because she normally acted like such a serious girl. But through text messages, she seemed surprisingly adorable. The two of them were chatting about how sore their bodies still were after the training. She replied almost instantly and asked if he was doing okay, even sending him a cute little cat emoji. And, of course, that only made him think it was even stranger. Even started imagining his cousin wearing some cute cat outfit while sending those messages. Dangerous imagination territory unlocked. But then Ravana suddenly appeared and asked what he was doing, and he replied that he was texting his cousin. He explained that he had gone through extremely intense training, so both he and his cousin were dealing with sore bodies. However, the moment Ravina heard that he had been messaging another girl, she instantly became jealous and immediately asked if his cousin was pretty. And the boy casually answered yes, saying his cousin was very beautiful. At that moment, he started thinking about how ridiculously attractive all the characters in this game world were. And the very first person he imagined was Ravina herself after she grew older. But the girl became even more jealous, saying she didn't realize he was actually close to another girl. She even said that he didn't need Ravana anymore since he already had another girl worrying about him. Wait a second, are you jealous? She immediately denied it while turning her face away. But the boy actually felt happy because he realized she liked him too. So he turned toward Ravana and told her that she was beautiful as well, even prettier than his cousin. The moment she heard that, her face turned completely red from embarrassment, and she immediately started punching him repeatedly, while insisting that she wasn't pretty at all, while he just laughed. Right after that, we could see that he ended up covered in bruises again. Critical hits under a combo attack. Class was about to begin, but Ravenna couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that he might grow closer to his cousins and eventually forget about her. At that moment, he suddenly mentioned that he had brought her a present, and the guy straight up pulled a sword out of his backpack, saying he wanted to give it to her. Yes, guys. This absolute madman brought a sword to school and casually said it was so she could learn swordsmanship. Since she had been training with his family, he figured giving her a sword would be a good gift. And when she looked at the blade, she could see her own reflection staring back at her. She was scared to even hold such a weapon and kept asking whether it was really meant for her, and he confirmed that it was. She genuinely loved the gift and even promised she would make good use of it. The other students found the whole thing fascinating and immediately rushed over to look at the cool sword, asking Ryu if he was really the one who brought it. The girl noticed that her friend was suddenly becoming extremely popular, and she became incredibly embarrassed. The boys started asking whether Ravenna was planning to become a hunter too, and they even commented on how awesome she was. As he looked at the girl, he realized she was finally starting to get along with her classmates. And that made him happy because in the original timeline of the game's story, everyone discriminated against her. That was why he felt so relieved seeing her smiling and fitting in with everyone. The scene shifts to a little later. He had already finished studying, but he mentioned that he wanted to keep studying longer because he still hadn't fully learned the subjects yet. But the moment he pulled out his book, a small letter suddenly fell out. It was a note decorated with 3 hearts, looking exactly like a love letter. He quickly picked it up. Then he started wondering who could have secretly hidden it inside his book, and Ravana immediately started yelling in jealousy again. He even asked Ravana if she knew who had placed the letter there, and she answered that she honestly had no idea at all. He even suggested that maybe it had been sent by someone who disliked him, but he couldn't think of anyone who would do that. Meanwhile, the girl was getting seriously nervous, and the worst part was that the envelope had heart stickers all over it. As soon as he opened the letter to read it, she became insanely curious. Guys, the note said that someone would be waiting for him on the rooftop after class because they had something important to tell him. The moment she heard that, her little ears perked right up so she could listen more carefully to what he was reading. She had also realized that Ryu had become extremely popular over the last few days because he was confident and also a hunter. On top of that, he belonged to a famous swordsmanship family, so naturally he was attracting attention from other girls. Because of that, she started imagining the possibility that one of those girls wanted to confess her feelings to him. But our boy seriously thought the whole thing was just a dual request. She instantly shouted after realizing her friend was unbelievably dense. Bro's romance stat is sitting at negative numbers. Poor Ravenna ended up walking home completely depressed. She kept remembering how Ryu thought the letter was meant for a duel. It was painfully obvious that a girl was trying to confess to him, and she had even told Ryu exactly that. Honestly, just imagining him getting a girlfriend and leaving her behind made her feel miserable. Even so, Ryu still said he planned to head to the school rooftop after classes to meet whoever sent the letter. And simply thinking about the possibility of it being a confession made her even sadder. She was completely confused, guys. She still didn't fully understand that she liked Ryu. And she also couldn't figure out why she was feeling this upset. So she stopped walking and started thinking about the possibility of Ryu getting a girlfriend. If that happened, maybe she wouldn't be able to stay friends with him anymore. Looking completely downhearted, she muttered that she absolutely didn't want that to happen. Then, after twitching her ears, she suddenly thought that maybe it really could be a dual letter after all. Maybe someone wanted to challenge Ryu, meaning he could end up in danger. The moment she considered that possibility, she immediately turned around and declared that she needed to run back to school to protect her friend. Yeah. She was definitely not just looking for an excuse to spy on him or anything. Meanwhile, Ryu eventually arrived outside the rooftop area. He took a deep breath to prepare himself and activated his detection sense technique. Using it, he realized there were 3 people hiding behind the ventilation ducts, and he also noticed Ravana secretly spying nearby from the staircase. So he immediately shouted that he knew there were 3 people hiding back there. And we quickly find out it was those triplets, guys. Since he believed this was some kind of duel challenge, Ryu instantly drew his sword. He even threatened to slice the air ducts apart if they didn't come out. But right then, one of the boys quickly reached out, begging him to stop. Those guys were distant relatives of Ryu, basically the kind of cousins so far removed, nobody even remembers the family tree anymore. Letting out a sigh, Ryu admitted he never expected it to be those 3. He even asked whether they were trying to intimidate him again. But one of the boys quickly denied it, saying it was actually the complete opposite. And just like that, all 3 of them dropped to the ground, apologizing and desperately begging Ryu for help. Meanwhile, our protagonist had absolutely no idea what was happening anymore. One of the boys explained that things had gone terribly wrong for them and that they no longer had sponsorships to continue becoming hunters. That was why they were pleading for Ryu to convince his father to sponsor them instead. At that moment, our protagonist finally understood the situation. Ravenna was still secretly listening nearby, and when she realized it was only those 3 bullies, she immediately relaxed. Sung had been the one sponsoring those triplets, and after they lost badly to Ryu, Sung completely cut off their support. Our protagonist realized that the 3 of them no longer had any place to train because their families were poor, which was why they were desperately begging for forgiveness. But Ryu immediately realized this could become the perfect opportunity for revenge, and he angrily asked how they even had the nerve to request something like that from him. Even so, the boys kept humiliating themselves and apologizing over and over again. But what Ryu really wanted to know was why they delivered the message using that weird letter instead of simply introducing themselves directly. Especially since the handwriting looked super cute, which definitely wasn't something guys normally used. But the boys explained that they had asked a girl to write it for them. They even said they had left hints by placing 3 different stickers on the envelope. And according to them, the heart stickers were meant to symbolize how sorry they were, while they awkwardly struck some ridiculous pose. Ryu realized those guys were willing to completely destroy their own dignity just to earn forgiveness. Meanwhile, poor Ravenna was secretly watching all of this embarrassing nonsense unfold. Second-hand embarrassment damage activated. The boys continued humiliating themselves while desperately begging to be forgiven, and Ryu simply stood there watching the entire thing. At that moment, he realized he might actually be able to use those boys. If he truly wanted to reach the game's good ending, he would need more allies by his side. So he told the 3 boys to stand up and clearly stated that he was willing to help them. However, there was one thing they needed to understand first. They were going to become his followers, but they better not annoy him constantly. He would ask his father to allow them into the swordsmanship training academy. But if he ever discovered that the 3 of them were secretly acting as some spies, then they should consider themselves dead. After saying that, he dismissed them, and the 3 boys quickly left. At the exact same moment, he suddenly turned around and called out to Ravana, saying he already knew she had been hiding there the whole time. Completely embarrassed, she asked how he figured it out, and quickly added that she definitely wasn't jealous. She claimed she was only worried about him, which was why she came back to make sure he was okay. Yeah, sure. He laughed softly and thanked her for being concerned about him. And while blushing furiously, she insisted for the 3rd time in a row that she absolutely was not jealous. Later on, he finally returned home. The boy's father said that he had finally managed to find the mage Ryu had asked about. At first, he didn't remember who she was, but the moment he recalled that she was the incredibly powerful mage from the game, he was immediately shocked. Her name was Aina, and she was a mage who would personally come to their house to perform an evaluation. At long last, the big day had arrived. Ravina came to his house very early in the morning since it was the weekend and a mage would be testing her abilities. Lena thanked the little girl for waking up so early on a weekend, but Ravina replied that it wasn't difficult at all and that she barely slept because she was too anxious. After taking his friend's backpack, he felt happy seeing how excited she was too. She went upstairs to his room to play with Lilica. While deep down, he kept thinking that Ravina absolutely could not mess up today. That was because today would determine whether or not they would be trained by Aina. He explained all of this to Ravina, saying they needed to perform well during the test, and he even mentioned that she was known as the Great Mage, the Witch of 5 Colors. That title existed because she had mastery over 5 different elements. She only lacked 2 more elements to complete the full set, and he even showed a chart displaying every element that existed in the game, each one stronger than the previous. People were naturally born with affinities towards certain elements, but with enough training, they could eventually learn to control others as well. In the game, this witch would later become known as the Witch of 7 Colors, because she would master all 7 elements. However, at this point in the story, she still only controlled 5. She still had 2 left to conquer. After hearing all those stories about how incredible the witch was, Ravenna immediately became insecure and said there was no way she could pass the test. But our protagonist remained confident because according to the game's story, Ravenna would become one of the strongest witches in existence and would almost achieve a perfect score during the exam. At that moment, Ayana finally arrived at the hero's house. She immediately stated that her time was extremely limited and that the only reason she accepted testing children from a swordsman family was because the Zan family was incredibly influential and powerful. But the moment she looked at the 2 kids, she instantly assumed they were weak and wouldn't pass the test anyway. She started roasting both of them right from the start, leaving the 2 completely embarrassed and feeling terrible. Savage NPC introduction unlocked. The boy couldn't help thinking that she was way too strict and harsh toward others, although deep down he knew she actually had a good heart. In a cold and serious tone, she told them to begin the test immediately, and if neither of them passed, she would leave right away. Completely fired up, Ryu declared that he could take the test first. The woman responded that the examination would begin immediately. Deep down, she clearly wasn't expecting much from either of them since they both looked pretty weak. The test involved placing their hands inside her hat, a magical hat created through one of her own spells. She referred to it as the magical animal hat, and the kids immediately joked about how terrible that name sounded. Once someone placed their hand inside and released mana, an animal would emerge from the hat. Based on the type of creature that appeared, she would evaluate the person's magical potential. She even demonstrated how it worked by putting her own hand into the hat and activating her mana. A brilliant light burst from the palm of her hand as she explained that this reflected her spell type. And the moment she released that mana, something incredible happened. It exploded like fireworks. And immediately afterward, a winged beast appeared in the air. That creature matched both her magic affinity and the type of mana flowing through her body. The two kids were completely amazed by the sight. The witch then announced that the first person taking the test would be the bunny-eared girl. And our hero agreed, saying it was probably better for her to go first anyway. She felt nervous and insecure, but Ryu already knew Ravenna would pass without a problem. She placed her hand inside the hat, and when she pulled it back out, the glowing orb of energy stayed attached to her hand. She became confused because it refused to leave, but suddenly the ball of energy shot upward into the sky. Everyone was shocked because the explosion was enormous. And remember, guys, the larger the creature, the greater the mana capacity it represented. When they looked up, they saw a gigantic trunk descending from above, revealing a massive elephant. Ryu already knew his friend possessed a lot of mana, but he had no idea it was this absurd. Not only was it a gigantic monster of an elephant, but it also had an intense purple color surrounding it. Absolute raid boss energy. The woman immediately shouted at him to figure out some way to make the girl cancel the spell. They even started throwing random objects at the elephant, but nothing happened. The witch explained to the boy that the only way to undo the spell was through the person who originally cast it. But Ravenna was completely frozen in shock, guys. She had never seen anything like this before. So our boy reached out his arm and gently pulled Ravenna close against his body. She immediately became bright red, not knowing how to react. Then he told her to focus on the sound of his heartbeat, because doing that would help her lose concentration on the spell. And that's exactly what she did, guys. She rested her ear against the boy's chest and started counting the beats of his heart. Because of that, the elephant spell slowly began to fade away. And just as they were about to get crushed beneath its feet, the girl finally calmed down. And like that, the spell disappeared completely. Deep down, we could tell she was secretly enjoying being held in his arms. Right after that, she fell to the floor apologizing repeatedly, saying she didn't do it on purpose. He reassured her that everything was fine, and that she just needed to calm down. Iona then walked closer and declared that Ravenna would become a great mage one day. She even placed a hand on the girl's shoulder and said she wanted to take her as her apprentice. She asked it directly and without hesitation. Guys, would you like to become my witch apprentice? The scene then shifts to later that same day, and after hearing the whole story, Sanji became incredibly happy. He even told his father that Aina had personally said Ravenna possessed an extremely pure and gentle form of mana. And the boy's father became overjoyed as well, saying it would be an incredible thing for her to train under such a powerful witch. Next, he called out to his father and asked whether their family would also sponsor Ravenna's magic academy. The man clearly understood how valuable it would be to have that girl as an ally, so he agreed without hesitation and even told his son to stay close friends with her. She had the potential to become an unbelievably powerful mage, maybe even one of the strongest in the entire world. But our protagonist was secretly worried that she might devote herself completely to magic, stop practicing swordsmanship, and eventually drift away from him. Still, his father reassured him that they could continue helping her no matter what, and that she would never simply cast them aside. The boy was scared, guys, because he already knew Ravenna's future. One day, she would become an evil witch driven by the desire to destroy the world. She would not stay this sweet and lovable forever. She was destined to become a villain. Changing the subject, his father asked how he himself had performed during the test. Lena and Yuna immediately got excited and started asking whether he had summoned a powerful beast too. The two kept bombarding him with questions, asking what kind of creature it was, whether it was huge, what color it had, and everything else imaginable. So he explained that he placed his hand inside the witch's hat and gathered mana into his palm. He had been unsure whether he would even pass the witch's evaluation, but in the end, he released the magic upward. A brilliant flash erupted, and from it appeared a giant paw covered in white fur. The three of them were completely stunned because the creature turned out to be a lion with the face of a rabbit. When he described it to his family, they looked absolutely shocked, and his little sister even said it looked ridiculously weird. In other words, he had successfully passed the witch's test. She even told him that his summoned creature was one of the strangest beings she had ever seen. And to make things even funnier, everyone burst out laughing because it basically looked like some kind of rabbit-cat-lion hybrid. Even Ayana became interested and said she wanted to train him just to discover what kind of magic he would eventually develop. On top of that, His attribute was light while Ravina's was darkness, which were precisely the final two elements she needed in order to master every existing element. The boy honestly found it a little embarrassing that he had manifested a bunny lion. But returning to the present, after telling everything to his family, he became fired up and declared that he would grow much stronger. And so, their training under the Witch of Five Colors officially began. A long time passed after that, guys. Our protagonist's father managed to obtain a far more important position within the family company, and everyone congratulated him for it. Meanwhile, our hero found the whole thing strange because he had unintentionally started changing the original storyline of the game. He even suspected that all of this was happening because of his influence. In the game, the boy's father would lose the succession battle to become the next patriarch. But now, his father was competing against his older brothers for the position of family head. His father even joked around saying his son no longer needed to worry about causing trouble all the time. Yuna ran over and hugged her father, proudly saying that he would definitely become the future leader of the family. Seeing his influence help his father become stronger made him genuinely happy. Still, he had no idea what kind of future his father was aiming for. If he truly wanted to become the family leader, he would have to fight through countless struggles. Even so, the boy congratulated his father with a smile. And just like that, more time continued to pass. Our boy kept training while the seasons slowly changed around him. His friendship with Ravina grew stronger and stronger over time. Sometimes, he even trained alongside his cousin, Seiko. And after 2 whole years, the Witch of Five Colors finally became the Witch of Six Colors. They had both changed a lot, and our protagonist was no longer the crying little kid he used to be. He had grown older, and now he was there sparring with Ravina. The girl had reached 16 years old and had become unbelievably beautiful. Careful, bro. Anime training arcs are dangerous for the heart too. He himself had become much stronger as well. And although his magic was not suited for direct attacks, he learned how to use mana to enhance the power of his sword strikes. He only had 1 year left before the game's main events would finally begin. And unlike the video game, where he could simply reload a save file after dying, this world worked very differently. He knew that if he died here, everything would truly be over. Ravina asked just how strong he intended to become since he spent every waking moment obsessed with training. While wiping away his sweat, he told her that he wanted to become as powerful as possible. Just remembering the overwhelming strength of his grandfather made him realize how long his road still was before reaching that level. Even if he trained for 100 years, surpassing his grandfather would still be incredibly difficult. That was exactly why he refused to give up. Ravina then admitted that now that she thought about it, he was probably right. And no matter what happened, she would always stay by his side cheering him on. Hearing those words made the boy grow slightly embarrassed. And with a small smile, he told her he wanted that to be a promise, that she would never abandon him. He already knew that in the game's storyline, Kong, the future protagonist, would have Psycho as his main ally. That was why he would need the support of the triplets and especially the help of the future Black Witch, Ravina herself, though he desperately hoped she would never become evil. After finishing one of their training sessions, the girl stepped outside and pointed toward the distance. He immediately celebrated because they had finally arrived. And that is when we see they were traveling aboard a ship. At last, they had reached Academy City. The girl stared in amazement and commented that the artificial island looked incredible. He had spent 4 entire years training nonstop and had become dramatically stronger. His status window even displayed just how much his abilities had increased. But now he was heading to Academy City to push himself even further. Academy City was both an educational institution and a massive artificial island dedicated to training elite hunters. And more importantly, this was the exact place where he would finally meet Kong, the protagonist of the game. He had spent countless hours playing through this exact map back when it was only a game. Because of that, he became unbelievably excited at the thought of visiting a place he already knew so well and finally meeting the main character himself. He was also happy because Ravina looked genuinely excited too. He could already feel that his mission to stop her from becoming a dark mage was actually working. Ever since she was little, she had dreamed about coming to this Academy City to train. She was always asking questions about what the place looked like. And now that they were finally arriving, the boy told her that her dream was about to come true. He even reminded her how years ago, she constantly talked about this place nonstop. Remembering that made her blush from embarrassment. Right at that moment, they suddenly heard someone getting sick nearby. When they turned around, they realized it was the three triplets. The group immediately looked disgusted because the guys were throwing up everywhere. Bro lost a battle against the boat ride itself. And just like that, they finally arrived in the city. The place was filled with magical portals everywhere, leaving Ravana completely fascinated. One of the triplets showed up complaining that he needed to go straight to the hospital. The poor guy claimed he had practically vomited out his soul already and thanked heaven they made it there alive. Ravana then asked whether they wanted her to cast a spell to cure their motion sickness, and the boys instantly got mad, demanding to know why she had not mentioned that earlier. After a while, they started searching for the academy district where they would be studying. Area 23 was located on the opposite side. At that moment, they turned toward the voice and noticed a beautiful girl asking whether they were also heading to the Golden Dragon Academy entrance exams. Ryu told the newcomer that they were there to apply to the Golden Dragon Academy and asked if the blonde girl was heading there as well. She was actually an extremely important character in the story. And although she was cheerful and kind, she constantly claimed that she was shy and easily embarrassed. She always described herself as an introvert, but that was a complete lie, guys. She was so outgoing that people had even given her the nickname of the lovable liar. Our hero already knew how friendly she was, how many friends she had, so he immediately greeted her and introduced himself. She replied that her name was Gabby. With a warm smile, she said they should compete fairly and avoid trying to trick one another. Right after that, she turned toward Ravana, complimented her hair, and asked for her name. But the girl standing beside him became incredibly flustered and even hid behind Ryu. Looking slightly annoyed, she told the protagonist to find a way to stop people from noticing her because she hated being the center of everyone's attention. Ryu jokingly remarked that Gabby looked like a puppy chasing after a tiny rabbit, and Gabby kept going on about how unbelievably adorable Ravenna was. At that moment, one of Gabby's friends called out to her, and the cheerful girl waved goodbye to the protagonist group, saying she hoped they could talk again later. He said farewell to her, while Ravenna quietly waved from the background. Now it was finally time to head to the academy. Inside the bus, the twins were in high spirits, but the protagonist seemed lost in thought. In truth, he was worried. There were numerous magical portals scattered across the island, and there were likely even more floating in the sky above the academy city. If those portals remained open, the erosion rate affecting them would continue to increase. And if that happened, it would mean the story was moving toward its bad ending. Since the game's main storyline was rapidly approaching, he knew he needed to become stronger as quickly as possible. He refused to let this world be destroyed. Eventually, they arrived at the room where the entrance examination would take place. One of the academy staff members explained that before Ryu could receive his testing badge, he first had to complete a registration form. But that guy looked so intimidating that several students ran away crying the moment they saw him. Ravenna asked what was going on, and Ryu explained that some people were simply terrified of submitting the paperwork. One of the agreements they had to sign stated that they would not file complaints even if they died from a fatal injury. In other words, guys, attending this academy could literally get you killed. But he assured Ravenna not to worry because neither of them would go down that easily. At that moment, someone with a powerful aura caught Ryu's attention. He quickly realized it was his cousin Sing, and it made sense that he was there since they were the same age. He even found himself thinking that this cousin of his would cause him plenty of trouble in the future. After finishing the paperwork, they headed over to an information board to find out where the orientation would be held. Ravenna commented that the test card looked more like a medallion, and she found it strange because they had been told it would be distributed 1 week before the exam. However, our hero explained that wasn't the case at all because the examination was actually beginning right there and then inside the auditorium. As soon as they entered, someone announced that the test had already started. The reason they had received the card at the last minute was because the entire thing was meant to surprise the participants. The instructor displayed the card, which looked more like a badge engraved with the academy's name, and explained that they would undergo various tests. Depending on the badge's color, it would also indicate their level of strength, with black representing the highest rank. They would have 1 full week to complete numerous challenges spread throughout the city. That badge, which served as the test card, also tracked their vital signs. This purpose was to monitor the physical condition of every participant. They were also forbidden from staying too far away from the badge for extended periods, or they would receive penalties. In a serious tone, the instructor announced that his explanation was coming to an end. Everyone present looked somewhat nervous, still unsure about how the examination actually worked. They would have to prove their qualifications using every skill at their disposal. With that, he wished everyone the best of luck. Ryu and Ravina felt quite confident about completing the week's challenges. Filled with excitement, the twin TRs asked whether they would tackle the tests together. But the protagonist told them to wait a moment. We'll be taking the tests separately. Meanwhile, the other applicants were deciding whether to form pairs, create groups of 3, or complete the challenges on their own. The protagonist explained that if all of them stayed together, everything would become 5 times harder because they would have to complete 5 times as many evaluations. Bro was already optimizing the speed run. For that reason, it would be better for the twins to handle only the 3-person requirements. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Ravina would complete the tasks assigned to the 2 of them. Truth be told, our guy just wanted an excuse to spend time alone with the girl, guys. Looking a little displeased, the 3 eventually agreed. Afterward, he told Ravina that they should head back to the dormitory and get some rest. She asked why he had refused to separate from her, and he came up with a convenient excuse, claiming that since their dorms were located close to each other, it simply made more sense for them to take the tests together. When they arrived, the girls suddenly let out a loud scream. It turned out they had been informed that a mistake occurred in the system while assigning the rooms, and because of that, the 2 of them would have to stay in the same room. The receptionist even apologized, explaining that the error had come from their side. Since there were no vacant rooms left in the dormitory, they would have no choice but to share a room and accept the situation. The woman even offered several discount coupons and added that room service would be completely free as compensation. Poor Ivano was completely overwhelmed because she was about to spend the night in the same room as the boy she liked. Acting all shy, she said she would accept it since there was no other option. When they entered the room, they noticed that the staff had placed an extra bed inside, so they would not have to sleep in the same one. Our protagonist felt somewhat embarrassed, while the girl kept reminding herself that she could not let him notice how nervous she was. With her cheeks glowing red, she said it was perfectly normal for 2 adults to share a room, because that was what couples always did in dramas. Ryu could only think that they were neither a couple nor adults, but sure, whatever helps. He even told her that, if she felt uncomfortable, he could always go sleep with the 3 twins instead. However, in a timid voice, she admitted that she did not actually dislike the idea of staying in the same room as him. In fact, she kind of liked it, and of course, that completely caught him off guard. The moment she realized she had just admitted that she liked it, she became so embarrassed that she threw a pillow straight at his face. Right after that, she dashed into the bathroom, announcing that she was going to take a shower. A moment later, she peeked her head back out, stared directly at him, and shouted that if he tried to spy on her while she was bathing, she would destroy him. Our boy immediately insisted that he would never do something like that. Deep down though, he was enjoying the situation, guys. Still, he told himself that he could not show any embarrassment because that would only make her even more flustered. After sitting down on the bed, he decided to work on one of the tests. At that moment, a bright light suddenly appeared, and the test materialized before him like a system window. He needed to solve a puzzle. The purpose of the challenge was to evaluate intellectual ability. He stared at the scattered pieces, but none of them seemed to make any sense. After thinking for a while, however, he started remembering this exact challenge from the game. It is a double-layered riddle, he thought. With that realization, he rapidly began assembling the pieces, and within moments, he formed something that resembled a diamond shape. That was the solution to the puzzle. The guy felt incredibly proud of himself since he had cleared the first test with remarkable ease. Soon afterward, his badge displayed the score he had earned. A few minutes later, Ravana came out of the bathroom and was surprised to discover that he had already completed one of the challenges. Afterward, he grabbed a towel and said he was going to take a shower and relax. Unfortunately, our big guy accidentally kicked his suitcase, and while trying to recover his balance, he stumbled straight toward Ravana. And just like that, the classic manhwa moment happened, guys. The dude ended up falling right on top of the girl he liked. It was an unbelievably awkward scene, and it almost looked like he had no intention of getting up. Achievement unlocked, accidental romance scene. His face instantly turned bright red, and Ravana screamed at him to get off her immediately. But she became so embarrassed herself that she completely froze for a moment before striking him. Early the next morning, our guy still had not fully recovered from that hit and noticed that she was still upset. On top of that, he had failed to get any sleep throughout the entire night. This happened whenever residual mana was unconsciously released by humans and mixed with the pure mana present in the environment. That process eventually created dimensional cracks. Those cracks produced strange noises that prevented Ryu from sleeping. People who possessed far more mana than ordinary individuals would unconsciously release impure mana into their surroundings. And that was exactly what caused those magical rifts that monsters emerged from. Since Ravenna possessed an enormous amount of mana, she had unknowingly created those noisy cracks that kept him awake all night. As he looked at her, he could tell she was genuinely still angry about what had happened the previous evening. At that moment, he suggested that they should split up while completing the tests. And she immediately became upset and demanded to know why. He explained that separating would allow them to complete more tests in a shorter amount of time. She stubbornly insisted that she did not want to be apart from him. He had only brought it up to see whether she would get upset by the idea. And after seeing her reaction, he decided they could think about it later. Later on, they continued taking additional tests. Eventually, a challenge appeared that even Ryu was not entirely sure how to solve. The system window displayed nothing but several white dots arranged in what seemed to be a regular pattern. Ravana stood beside him trying to help. The boy commented that it looked very similar to a test they had completed earlier. Because of that, he realized that the pattern was actually hiding a written message. He asked Ravina whether she had a pen. She replied that she did. Right afterward, he opened a dictionary on his phone and started testing different words against the pattern of dots. After some time, he successfully decoded portions of the challenge. Smiling confidently, he said that he remembered this particular test very clearly from when he played the game. And just like that, he managed to clear yet another challenge. In the end, they decided to split up so they could earn as many points as possible. And the girl was no longer pouting, guys. To tackle the next challenge, he had to solve a riddle, so he carefully read through the information provided. Soon, he received a clue and headed toward the designated location. The clue stated, "Where the footsteps of heroes converge, the founder of the most precious gem rests beneath everlasting glory." It was a quote from a movie, and he recognized it immediately, allowing him to connect the pieces together and arrive at the correct destination, which was the Heroes' Hall of Fame. He started examining all the hints and inscriptions connected to the test, guys. Eventually, he remembered exactly how this challenge worked in the game and knew it had something to do with a bronze statue. Since the first clue mentioned footprints, he figured he needed to find a statue that had visible feet. When he got closer, he noticed a diamond-shaped mark identical to the figure he had assembled during the first test. That was how he found the piece he needed. The moment he brought his badge near it, the symbol began glowing brightly, and another challenge was successfully completed. As the days passed, he continued clearing one test after another, including several that involved physical activities. He accumulated so many points that his amulet changed colors from white to gold, then green, and eventually reached the highest possible rank. He even managed to attain the blue tier. When he met up with Ravina, she proudly revealed that she had also reached the blue rank, which was the maximum color attainable during that phase of the challenge. However, something soon caught her attention. She pointed out that several hyenas seemed to be watching them. A status window suddenly appeared, asking whether Ryu wished to replace his rabbit title with the lion cub title. So he jokingly told the bunny girl that they were about to hunt some hyenas for a snack. Bro switched factions and picked predator mode. With that, they began running from the other competitors. Apparently, there was a rule allowing participants to steal other competitors' amulets and claim their points. They had completely forgotten about that rule, but it had always been part of the exam, which explained why they were being chased. Ravenna ended up cornered in an alley, and the other competitors arrived, confidently declaring that there was nowhere left for them to escape. Ryu simply laughed and asked whether they truly wanted to go through with this. After all, he was Ryu of the Zan family, the family of the divine sword. The moment they realized who he was, fear appeared on their faces, though they still pointed out that it was 1 against 10. But then they were left speechless. Our protagonist called out to his beloved bunny companion, and she immediately appeared carrying a massive warhammer. After slamming the weapon into the ground, a huge explosion erupted. With a confident smile, she asked if they genuinely believed they could defeat the two of them. Those bullies quickly realized that winning this fight was going to be extremely difficult. And to make matters worse, our hero drew his sword. It was a legendary blade infused with the power of lightning. Just seeing the electric sparks dancing around it was enough to make them tremble. That was the Beast King style 7th form. He moved through them like a bolt of lightning and unleashed the Lion's Pierce technique, defeating every single opponent in an instant. Speedrun complete. The boys collapsed onto the ground unconscious. Afterward, he asked Ravina whether she had managed to collect the tickets from the other competitors, and she replied that she had. She had retrieved them using her wind element. However, she explained that she only intended to take enough points for them to improve their own scores. But Ryu told her she might as well take all their points because they were too weak and did not deserve to study at the academy. After collecting all the amulets, he stepped forward and activated one of his sword techniques. Then he simply sliced through every single medal owned by those competitors. The defeated boys demanded to know why he had done that, and Ryu casually replied that he had no interest in keeping points obtained from weak people, while Ravina stood in the background completely confused. According to him, they lacked the talent required to become hunters. Because of that, they did not deserve admission into the academy. Ravina was genuinely shocked to hear him speak so harshly. And in the end, the others even shouted at him, calling him a demon. 2 days passed, and at last, the day of the practical examination arrived. They submitted their tickets and officially secured their spots in the next stage. They had earned black amulets, the highest possible rank, proving that they belonged to the strongest class. Ryu explained to Ravina that the practical exam would take place across several locations and involve a huge number of participants. The truth was that she was worried about getting lost. With that, they headed toward the retreat center. Upon arriving, they immediately noticed that a large crowd had already gathered there, and Ryu quickly became concerned. The reason was simple: the competitors present looked incredibly powerful. Ravana even hid behind him nervously because everyone there seemed to be staring directly at them. It felt as though nobody particularly liked either Ryu or Ravana. So he asked her what exactly was frightening her, pointing out that they were probably attracting attention simply because they were strong. Even so, deep down he was genuinely worried because literally everyone was watching them. It might have been because of their black badges, which symbolized exceptional strength and indicated that they had achieved the highest score during the second examination. At that moment, Ravina realized that people were whispering about her bunny ears and discussing the fact that she was the disciple of the seven-colored witch. The crowd continued gossiping, claiming that she was only interested in benefits, and that the only reason she stayed close to Ryu was because he belonged to one of the 10 legendary families. Some people started saying that she was truly amazing because she was Luna, the disciple of the seven-colored witch. And hearing that made her blush from embarrassment. At that moment, Ryu realized that she was actually more famous than he was, but then he suddenly heard someone mention his name. It was a girl saying that he was Ryu of the Dozen family, a member of one of the most powerful clans, and that he was also highly skilled in martial arts. However, another guy immediately argued that he was nothing more than a little bunny from a divine family, leaving him completely frustrated. It seemed that Ravana's reputation was genuinely greater than his. Even while he was moving away from the crowd, he could still hear people talking about how weak he supposedly was. However, one of the girls pointed out that many people now called him the lion cub. That was because he was no longer the frightened little rabbit he used to be and had become a promising young warrior. After hearing that, he silently vowed to prove to everyone that he was no longer the coward they remembered. At that moment, he heard someone calling his name, and when he turned around, he saw the twins accompanied by Bia. Smiling brightly, the girl said she had been waiting for them and even asked whether the two of them remembered her. Ryu walked over and replied that, of course, he did. Bia commented that she had no idea the two of them were so famous, and mentioned that some of her friends had been talking about how incredibly popular they were. She also revealed that there was another applicant competing for admission who belonged to one of the legendary families. Then she subtly pointed in a certain direction and told Ryu to take a discreet look over there. Ryu noticed a boy dressed in a black uniform. That young man was named Honda, and he belonged to the Zhang family, one of the 10 legendary families. Bia even mentioned that Honda had been watching Ryu the entire time. Our protagonist knew very well that this guy was extremely powerful because he was a direct descendant of the Zhang family. He was also one of the companions in Kang's group, the protagonist of the game. While Ryu was recalling all of this information, the boy suddenly began walking toward him. A moment later, Honda stopped right in front of Ryu. With a serious expression, he asked whether this boy truly belonged to the Zan family, the clan known for divine swordsmanship, while staring him down with an intimidating gaze. Then, almost instantly, his expression changed and he smiled, introducing himself as Hong and saying that it was a pleasure to meet him. Our protagonist already knew that this guy was actually friendly, so he immediately reached out his hand and introduced himself as well. The guy even invited our protagonist to train together with him, but Ryu knew that this person was obsessed with training. He had become fixated on Kong, the protagonist, and constantly chased him around asking for sparring sessions. Because of that, Ryu knew he could not accept the offer and started coming up with various excuses. At that moment, one of the instructors arrived alongside several students. The man wearing glasses told them to bring that item over, and shortly afterward, a small truck rolled in, carrying multiple boxes. The students could barely hold those tiny containers. Ryu wondered why the object's size had been reduced even though its mass remained exactly the same. The students watching nearby had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. One of the boys even picked one up and started laughing. Bad idea detected. At that moment, one of the instructors noticed what he was doing and immediately used his power on the student who was laughing. The boy instantly collapsed unconscious, and the instructor calmly announced that he had been disqualified. The senior students quickly grabbed him and carried him away. Our protagonist began wondering where Saika, his cousin, was and whether she had already completed this examination. She was also helping with the event since she was a senior student and had taken the same test 2 years earlier. She was also a member of the student council. Ryu commented that this role suited her personality perfectly. The instructor announced that he was about to activate the device and ordered everyone to step back. At that moment, the boxes began shining with an intense blue glow before suddenly cracking apart. Nobody understood what was happening, and unexpectedly, those tiny boxes transformed into enormous gates. The gates were numbered from 1 through 5. The instructor then explained that the next challenge consisted of pushing open these giant gates and passing through them. The purpose was to evaluate both physical strength and the amount of mana possessed by each participant. This year, the number of applicants was approximately 13,429, meaning there were 4 to 5 times more candidates than available spots. Because of that, creating such a difficult test was essentially a way to filter out and reduce the number of applicants. Many students immediately failed the challenge and were eliminated. Only 200 participants had managed to obtain black tickets, representing nearly 1.6% of all candidates. One of the participants suddenly laughed, and it was none other than Honda, as he opened the gate with incredible ease. He had already cleared the first gate. In total, he managed to open 4 gates, with only the final one remaining. But that was ultimately his limit, guys. Afterwards, several other members of famous families successfully passed through all 5 gates with little difficulty. The directors observing the examination commented that this year's participants were exceptionally talented. However, one participant in particular captured the director's attention. It was none other than a girl with bunny ears. She wore a serious expression, and the moment Ravenna placed her hand on the massive gate, dark mana immediately began flowing from her body. She exerted only a little force, yet everyone was stunned by how dense her mana was, allowing her to open all 5 gates with incredible ease. Not even one of the instructors present could believe what he had just witnessed. The man even blurted out in disbelief, wondering how she had managed to open all 5 gates at the same time. From above, the directors commented that not even the direct heir of the Zhang family had been able to open all 5 gates. One of them even asked who that young woman was. She was the disciple of instructor Yena, the 7-colored witch. That explained why she was so powerful. Aina simply laughed and remarked that she was incredibly fortunate to have students like that. After finishing her test, Ravenna immediately ran over and hid behind Ryu because she felt embarrassed about being the center of attention. Her status window showed remarkably high attributes. And on top of that, she possessed 84 mana points, which was considered exceptional for someone her age. Now it was Ryu's turn to take the test. He stepped in front of gate number 1. He even broke into a cold sweat because the gate looked much larger than he had expected. Without hesitation, he unleashed all of his mana and opened the first gate with ease. After that, he moved on to the second gate and then the third. Everyone watched anxiously as he continued until he reached the 4th gate. This one was not nearly as easy as the previous 3. At that moment, he began feeling something strange happening inside his body. It felt as though he had already exhausted all of his mana. He even started feeling disappointed in himself and thought that this was his true limit. Still, something felt wrong because Ravana had managed to open all 5 gates in a single attempt. Then he realized the truth. The hidden dark element mana Ravana had released was still lingering within those gates. Since his own mana was aligned with light, he was essentially being drained by it. Standing before the 5th gate, he clenched his teeth and forced out even more strength. He looked as though he was on the verge of death, and even Ravenna began worrying about him. Then a massive explosion erupted. He finally succeeded in opening the last gate, though his body was left battered from the tremendous effort. Meanwhile, inside the director's hall, they were discussing the final student who had just passed the test. He had used Ravenna's mana, which was naturally his weakness, to amplify his own strength and force the gate open. However, the witch explained that such a method was extremely dangerous. He could have even ruptured his own meridians. Back in the testing area, Ravenna looked deeply concerned. She told him that he had put himself in danger just to open the final gate, and that there had been no need to go that far. Honda came running over to congratulate Ryu, saying that he had performed exceptionally well. Our protagonist, however, wore a bored expression because Honda was honestly way too clingy. The friendship DLC activated automatically. Ryu and Ravenna had both passed the examination with perfect scores. Naturally, that achievement caught the director's attention. The next stage of the tournament would take place inside a magical portal. It would be a practical examination lasting nearly 6 hours. Their objective was to reach the summit of a mountain by any means necessary. Of course, some participants could already fly and reach the top with little effort. Others possessed ice powers and simply froze the lake before crossing it. And naturally, there were those who relied on much more straightforward methods, like our protagonist. Even Ravenna pointed out that he could be a bit reckless whenever he focused on accomplishing a goal. He mentioned that some kind of barrier was maintaining the thick fog surrounding the area. The girl suggested that numerous spells had probably been used to expand the barrier and block everyone's visibility. They only had a few minutes left to reach the mountaintop, so they needed to hurry. At that moment, he noticed something lying on the ground. It appeared to be a trap. The instant he saw it, an idea came to mind, and he started laughing. Only 10 minutes remained. Meanwhile, the 3 girls from the divine families were arguing over who had arrived first. Some of the instructors pointed out that the 2 most promising students still had not reached the summit. But at that moment, we discovered that Ryu had come up with a brilliant plan. He intended to use the trap to launch himself into the air. Only 7 seconds remained, and they were still flying. And with exactly 1 second left, they landed on the mountaintop. Talk about a last-second clutch. Ravana looked completely shaken and declared that she never wanted to do that again. Ryu's evasion ability automatically activated whenever he was placed in mortal danger. Because of that, if he had stepped on the trap alone, his passive skill would have activated and caused him to dodge automatically. That was why he stepped onto the trap together with Ravana, so they could both be launched through the air. They had already cleared multiple stages of the examination, guys, but they still had not reached the end. Later, after completing that challenge, he headed to a cafe. The place was incredibly luxurious. Guys, it was the kind of establishment where wealthy and influential people gathered to exchange information. He met up with his cousin there, and she even told him that he had performed very well throughout the challenges. This was the first time Ravina had ever met Sika, and she felt a little jealous. However, Sika had come there because she wanted to share some important information with them. Ryu immediately asked what the final test scheduled for tomorrow would be like. She replied that she was not even sure it would be the final test, and added that she could not reveal how it worked because that would be considered cheating. However, since she had taken the exam herself in the past, she had gained some useful knowledge and was willing to give him a few hints without being unfair. She explained that every year, the practical entrance exam focused on the ability to freely control the manifestation of mana. She went on to say that the instructors wanted to see whether candidates could use their bodies like a switch, turning their mana on and off at will. Since she was both his cousin and a senior student, this was about as much advice as she could provide, because sharing any more information would cross the line. By then, night had already fallen. Outside, Ryu thanked his cousin for the information and said that he would meditate on it together with Ravenna. She also warned him that the island became extremely dangerous after dark and advised him not to wander around outside. After all, a creature known as the ghost spider was active in that area. We then see that the ghost spider had already claimed another victim. People screamed in agony as she calmly declared that she would turn them into her dolls. She even leaned close to a girl and whispered that there was no need to scream so loudly. Yep, guys. The new villain has officially entered the story. The following day, they headed to the Dimensional Hall. The instructor announced that the fourth round would take place inside the same artificial portal. Gabby appeared and greeted him, saying she was extremely excited about the upcoming test. The instructor then began explaining the existence of demonic humans, who were essentially hunters that had lost their licenses and chosen a path of evil. These individuals embraced immoral beliefs, twisted values, and malicious intentions. One of the examples he gave was the ghost spider. That character had appeared in the game before, and Ryu remembered her very clearly. Because of that, he started thinking that this woman might show up during the final test and make things far more difficult. She was incredibly dangerous because she hunted students and transformed them into her dolls. After entering the portal, he immediately started hunting ghosts. Naturally, he was a little nervous because he had spawned right in the middle of a mansion. Still, he performed extremely well, leaving everyone outside thoroughly impressed. He had not yet crossed paths with Honda or Bia because they had been assigned different testing locations. However, all the participants would eventually be gathered together for the final challenge. He could easily run into one of the girls from the divine families, or he might even end up fighting Honda, who was basically a beast kept on a leash. The possibility worried him quite a bit, and Ravana even asked why he looked so concerned. At that moment, a woman approached and announced that she would explain the rules of the final round. She was the president of the Golden Dragon Academy, the Star Witch herself, President Yu. The boys immediately lost their minds, talking about how beautiful she was. The Star Witch was an extraordinarily powerful mage recognized across the entire world. She was known as the owner of Stellar Voyage, a satellite-type magical weapon that remained suspended within the atmosphere above the Academy City. She was actually the same age as Ryu's grandfather. However, she used a special form of magic to maintain her youthful appearance. She congratulated all the students who had reached this stage of the examination. She even remarked that this year's candidates included many exceptional talents. For that reason, she had decided to personally oversee the event. The fifth and final round was a challenge she had personally designed. It would be called the Ticket Battle, and our protagonist immediately became a little uneasy. All the students received a chart on their phones showing the value of each type of amulet. This was basically a Chunin exam arc, guys. They would fight one another in order to steal amulets, and as the colors changed, the amulets would become increasingly valuable. For example, a black amulet was worth 100 points, a blue one was worth 70, a red one was worth 50, and so on. Students would only pass if they managed to accumulate 200 points. Ryu immediately became worried because everyone would probably want to target him. After all, his amulet alone was worth 100 points. The president then clarified that each person's own amulet was automatically worth 100 points to them. Even if someone started with a white amulet worth only 10 points, it would still count as 100 points for its owner. In other words, the value would only increase or decrease if another person stole it. While she continued explaining the rules of the test, the thing Ryu was truly worried about was the ghost spider. Ravana pointed out that once they entered the portal, they would be sent to random locations and would need to find each other afterward. He made a funny face and asked if she was scared. She immediately denied it. Then he jokingly teased her by saying she already missed him even though they had not separated yet. She responded with an adorably annoyed expression. At that moment, something caught his attention. He told her not to get hurt because he would be genuinely worried. He even added that if anyone tried to mess with her, she should simply take them down. Soon afterward, they were transported into the portal. The moment he arrived, he felt that someone was nearby. The test would last approximately 6 days, so finding a safe place to spend the night would be important. He was worried about both Ravana and himself. Then, all of a sudden, he froze in shock. His evasion skill activated instantly, causing him to dodge at the very last second. He immediately realized he was under attack, and the moment he saw that scythe, he already had a good idea of who it belonged to. Without wasting any time, he drew his sword. The girl casually explained that she had simply attacked the first person who appeared in front of her. But once she realized it was Ryu from the Ozen family, she became even more excited, or so the girl claimed. She was Yuri of the Na family, one of the most troublesome families during the later stages of the game's story. She kept addressing Ryu in a strangely affectionate way, and he immediately asked why she was talking to him like that. He even pointed out that they had only met the day before, so acting that familiar made absolutely no sense. Trying to change the subject, he asked whether she was also looking for a safe base to hide in, hoping to distract her from attacking him. However, when he turned around to leave, she asked why he was running away. After all, they were in the middle of an exam, and she was fully prepared to become his opponent. Taking a fighting stance, she admitted that it might be annoying, but she still intended to defeat him. Besides, he was someone attracting a great deal of attention. Because of that, she wanted to see exactly how strong he was. And if she managed to beat him, she would earn even more merit. The girl charged straight at him while he prepared himself to draw his blade. Meanwhile, another participant had already defeated 2 students. She even commented that the test had been ridiculously easy so far. Not long afterwards, she started taking down even more participants with ease. Overflowing with confidence, she declared that these kids were nowhere near her level. Meanwhile, Honda was having a rough time against another girl. She belonged to the Cha family and possessed special eyes as well. Using her ocular abilities, she was able to analyze Honda's entire power structure. Watching from afar, the ghost spider remarked that these girls were incredibly powerful. She thought they would make wonderful additions to her doll collection. Yeah, definitely not a friendly hobby. Meanwhile, Yuri continued her battle against Ryu. He successfully dodged every attack she threw at him, but he knew he could not win by doing nothing but evading. At that moment, she hurled her scythe toward him. Seeing the opening, he realized it was the perfect chance to launch a counterattack. The girl suddenly laughed and asked whether Ryu honestly thought she fought half-heartedly. Far from being disarmed, she had another weapon entirely. Her hair transformed into gigantic fists. She attempted to strike him using those hair-made fists. However, our protagonist was already one step ahead and sliced through her hair. The girl never expected her hair to be cut. Then she remembered that he belonged to the divine swordsmanship family. She openly admitted that she had lowered her guard. But now, she said, the fight was finally becoming interesting. Her scythe returned to her hand, and she warned him to get ready if he wanted to stay alive. Ryu immediately started teasing her by tossing a black badge into the air. He even pointed out that he had never underestimated her for a second. At first, she assumed that badge belonged to him, but it was actually hers, guys. He had stolen it. She immediately asked whether he had taken her badge while cutting her hair. The big guy casually confirmed that he had. He even joked that if she wanted a rematch, they would probably have to fight for 3 days and 3 nights. However, the girl simply put away her scythe and admitted defeat. She acknowledged that she had lowered her guard. She even said that she should have protected her badge better instead of leaving it hanging from her clothes. In other words, she hoped to meet him again at the academy. Before leaving, she also announced that she would continue hunting other competitors. Ryu was genuinely surprised because, honestly, that had been way too easy. He had already met the requirements to pass the exam. After all, he had successfully accumulated 200 points. He even found himself wondering whether Ravenna was doing well too. Meanwhile, the girl was fighting against numerous other participants. Holding her enormous hammer, she explained that she had only defeated that girl because the other person had been the one looking for trouble. We then see that her opponent was one of the red-haired girls. This girl was named Erin. She belonged to the M family and insisted that she could not accept such a humiliating defeat. She had been certain she would attack first and force Ravenna into a disadvantageous position. She even concluded that she had lost because Ravenna happened to be one of the disciples of the seven-colored witch. Ravenna calmly walked over and took her black badge. The redhead desperately told Ravenna not to take it away. But the rabbit girl explained that she had no choice. Then she simply turned around and left. The red-haired girl felt utterly humiliated. She had been defeated by someone who did not even belong to a famous family. Soon, she began crying and saying that she simply was not good enough. The next morning, our protagonist woke up and stretched. A system window displayed how many badges were currently located in his area. Its entire purpose was basically to encourage the participants to fight each other. There was also a radar that warned them whenever someone was getting close. Because of that, what Ryu really wanted was to get away from the conflict zone. Meanwhile, poor Ravenna could not stop screaming because people kept coming after her one after another. Ironically, thanks to that, she ended up collecting a huge number of badges. By the way, she had also started looking for Ryu because she was already missing him. At that moment, a blonde girl suddenly appeared. Ravenna froze for a moment because that girl was unbelievably beautiful. Ravenna remembered Ryu mentioning that this girl was actually a princess. Around 200 years ago, during the era known as the Great Revolt, something significant had happened involving the World Tree. That kingdom was known as the Grace Empire. The girl's name was Lisa, and she was said to be the princess of the Empire of Grace. Ravenna immediately panicked, saying there was no way she could fight against a princess. The blonde girl then asked whether Ravenna was a disciple of the Seven-Colored Witch. Nervously, the little rabbit girl answered that she was. The princess then said she wanted to be treated the same way as everyone else, and if they ended up fighting, she wanted Ravenna to face her as an equal. Ravenna started stuttering, and the princess found her reaction rather unusual. She became so embarrassed that her cheeks turned bright red. The princess extended her hand and asked whether Ravenna would like to form an alliance with her, since they seemed to get along quite well. Ravenna knew perfectly well that trusting strangers was dangerous. Still, the princess appeared to be someone she could rely on. However, she had learned from Ryu that she should always be cautious when making friends with fellow competitors. But since the princess seemed genuinely kind, she reached out her hand and agreed to partner up with her. Meanwhile, Ryu was wandering around alone while searching for Ravenna. By that point, he had already defeated numerous competitors who had teamed up in an attempt to eliminate him. In total, he had accumulated 500 points. Soon, the academy supply crates were dropped into the area. Our guy immediately took off running, determined to collect as many supplies as possible. One of the crates had landed nearby. When he arrived, he came face to face with that incredibly friendly girl. She told Ryu that she had become friends with several other participants and that they were all working together. She even invited our protagonist to join her team. At that moment, he realized once again just how charismatic she really was. She even mentioned that she planned to share the supplies equally among everyone in her group. Then she asked Ryu how many points he had managed to gather from badges. He casually replied that he had earned a decent amount. At that moment, she asked whether he had seen that person. Ryu immediately asked who she was talking about. She explained that there's someone acting almost like an examiner, constantly seeking out battles with participants as if testing them. She also added that the individual was extremely powerful. Our protagonist immediately began suspecting that the person she was describing might be the ghost spider. The blonde girl continued, saying that this mysterious individual was very strange. She also carried a golden badge. On top of that, her weapons looked like a pair of twin swords. At that point, Ryu became certain she was talking about the ghost spider. He then told the blonde girl that he had a plan to lure that person out. First, they would gather all the badge points from her allies. Then they would use them as bait to set a trap for the ghost spider. Meanwhile, Gabby started drawing attention from nearby competitors. She loudly announced that she knew exactly where Ryu was. She even encouraged everyone around her to come attack our protagonist. The participants hiding nearby immediately felt tempted to join the hunt, but the whole thing was actually a trap. The moment they left their hiding spots or descended from their positions, our protagonist planned to cut them down using his sword techniques. However, the true purpose of the plan was to attract the attention of that dangerous woman. And as it turned out, she really was hiding at the top of a tree. Even so, she quietly remarked that she would never fall for such an obvious trap. Not today, Chief. However, if a fight was what this boy wanted, then a fight was exactly what she intended to give him.